of Israel from the bondage of slavery into the promised land. They prayed and wanted to be delivered. And Moses came. And, sir, as they journeyed through the desert on the way to the promised land, the people rebelled against God. The people rebelled against the leadership that they had chosen or that had been chosen to take them on this journey to freedom, to prosperity, away from deprivation, away from bondage. They said, sir, when Moses left them and went away to deal with other business, to commune with God, to receive instructions to improve their lives, they said, well, why he can't be down here with we? And in modern language, I suppose they may have asked, why is she flying about so much, sir? Why can't she be here with us? This is disrespectful. So rebellion ensued. And very soon, the very same people who wanted to be freed from bondage, the very same people who wanted to come out of slavery, were saying, man, you bring me out here in the desert to kill me? Well, things about here real bad. It's tough. Look, things was better during the slavery times. At least we used to get this and at least we used to get that. Why, sir? Because there were always persons who were willing to stoke discontent. And it became very easy for them to forget the hardships that they had been enduring. It became really easy on a daily basis to forget what bondage was really like. And soon they were saying deprivation was better, bondage was better, slavery was better. Sir, the Barbados Labour Party in 2018 brought this country of economic deprivation out of social stagnation, out of environmental degradation. They brought them out of a form of political bondage where people were told that they could be punished with silence, where people were told that they were the government and could do as they like, where an election was run down to the very last minute because there was no respect for the people. It was a form of political bondage such that the country had never seen the highest taxes ever, sir. And I want to speak the definition of development, sir, is to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of future generations. That is sustainable development, and it is predicated on 3 pillars: society, economy, and environment. Prior to this administration, sir, we saw the highest level of taxes that the country had ever seen. The highest level of taxes that the country had ever seen. They were constant, they were punitive, they were rising, and they were rising in the face of double-digit unemployment, up at 18% and rising. Unemployment is today down to 8%. It was a time of high inflation, again, double-digit inflation, also reducer. I think it is something close to 6% at the moment. They were in a situation where Monies were taken from the National Insurance Scheme. The first time ever in the history of this country that a government had raided the National Insurance Scheme. Not only that, the government was taking people's national insurance and not paying it into the scheme. In a situation where you have high NCD, so high drawing and demand on the scheme, and in a situation where your population was aging, and therefore the demands on the scheme were high, and the need for retirement payments or benefits from the scheme were higher than they ever were in history. And what happened then? We were told in this chamber that there ought to be some kind of problem, and there is a problem, arising out of the fact that this Barbados Labour Party had to make adjustments in our debt profile in order to be able to improve things in the country, in order to help reduce our debt payments from 68 cents out of $1, which there were before, to the 32 cents where there are now. And even though adjustments were made, and I want to say, sir, that this administration, since it came to government, paid back the monies that were owed to the NIS so that people could do them, could benefit from them. We had to make adjustments not to reduce benefits, but in 7 years from now, to say to people, you're going to have to work a little longer to obtain your benefits. And somehow this is being misrepresented as a terrible wrong. We are told about all of the people who suffered, and it is regrettable that some people would have lost some money as a result of a decision made to save the country and the economy. And the government has explained, the government has apologized, the government has sought to make amends. This is not a situation where CLECO collapsed because of poor management. And when people in the country who were really licked up, mashed up by the CLECO collapse, the government of the day under the Prime Minister said, oh, why are you so hard on him? He is our friend. So it didn't matter that people were suffering then, and we didn't hear any cry from some people that that was wrong. That friendship had nothing to do with those who were suffering. The greed of a few caused the collapse of a company. And the many suffered as a result of it. And now, because some people had to make adjustments to save the country because of the debt situation, you are hearing that somehow we did something wrong. And it is amazing that at least one member of the former administration who sat in the cabinet that made those decisions to raid the NIS and to not pay NIS, take it out of people's money and not pay it back in, are the very ones who are on the online programs criticizing the government for saving the NIS, are the very ones who are walking up in the front of the marches, in the NIS marches. There is a level of sanctimoniousness that we saw over the course of the last 2 days, and that we are hearing from the mouths of the Democratic Labour Party and all its acolytes. That is really very unfortunate, sir. So I want to do two things. I want to frame the political context, and then I want to come, as I did with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, when we had that debate, to look at the wider systemic issues, because really, that is what we need to be doing. Not just trying, I do this and you do that, and you ain't do this and you ought to do that. We need to get to the debate and the national conversation on what are the systemic underpinnings of poverty in this country. Why is it that repeated administrations have attempted to make adjustments to salary, to tax structure, to benefits, to all kinds of elements, constituent elements of the economy. And still we are seeing levels of poverty that we would rather not see. So let us as a country have the conversation about the systemic underpinnings of poverty that we need and ought to address if we are to effect social and economic transformation and have sustainable and sustained development for all the citizens of the country. The Prime Minister refers to it as giving every citizen a fair share of the pie. We were in a situation where our debt to GDP ratio was 178%. Today, although there's been a lot of fear-mongering about this government's borrowing, it is only 113%. Our debt ratio is substantially reduced. We were the third highest indebted country, not in the Caribbean, in the world. We are not having those negative statistics anymore. We have had consistent upgrades, not a single downgrade, as opposed to the 23. And you want to talk about Barbadians and what people should and should not get? Do not forget that Barbadians were not getting their income tax returns. If all kinds of small businesses and poor people were owed by the government to a tune of $1.9 billion, and this administration, despite COVID, despite the international situation, has paid people back. There was an 8-year wage freeze. Civil servants were not getting increases. We have given 3 increases in 6 years, despite the strictures that the international situation have placed on the Barbados economy. And some of the people who would have gotten back money from the $1.9 billion that was owed would have been teachers and nurses and clerks in the civil service, people who work for $75,000 and under. At the environmental level, the second pillar of sustainable development, the country was also in crisis. In Bridgetown, residents of Emerton and surrounding areas were being stunk out, sir, to use a Bajan expression, because this Bridgetown storage system was not working. And when we got to the bottom of it, sir, you saw the huge trees that were growing up in the various plant and equipment. So much so, sir, that the nutrients yielded fruit and vegetables. Growing up in the equipment, it wasn't being serviced, it wasn't being financed, it wasn't being replaced. It didn't matter if the people in the city choked to death. It didn't matter what the reputation of the country was. And then drive to Christchurch, where our country was reduced to its lowest ever with fecal effluent, raw fecal effluent on the streets. But people come in here with a lot of sanctimony. Oh, you have to do something. And all kinds of things. Not addressing where we had to bring the country from political bondage, out of political slavery, out of economic deprivation, out of environmental degradation, out of social stagnation. The state of police stations all over the country, they were seriously run down. Schools were in bad shape. All of them now have to be repaired, rehabilitated, refurbished, and that process is ongoing. New police stations have been built. Conditions have been improved. Then there was the issue of fees at the University of the West Indies, and that, again, we promised to address, and we did. Promise made, promise kept. We promised to address the sewer system woes, promise made, promise kept. We promised to lower debt, promise made, promise kept. We were told that it was not possible to increase the old age pensions. The old age pensions were promised, promise made, promise kept. We were told that it was not possible to give the salary increases to the civil servants. We promised, promise made, promise kept. We were told, sir, return to the social. New garbage trucks had to be bought. Crime had to be reduced, and we got the report at Christmas that crime levels have been significantly reduced in this country. It took a while. But combined with the social programs, combined with the fact that more people are working, we have been able to see the fall in the statistics for crime. We were in a situation, sir, where people who relied on public transport could not get to work in the mornings and could not get home at night. In fact, sir, a new bus fleet had to be bought, promise made, promise kept. We have new electric buses. But the interesting thing, sir, is that we will recall the absolute new meaning that had been brought to air conditioning in buses. We remember the photographs circulated on social media with the buses without any bottoms and people scotching off for their life, people drawing up on the people that they don't know in order not to fall through the holes. The buses are here, new buses. People are driving around in luxury by comparison with before, air-conditioned buses with Wi-Fi, promise made, promise kept. When you listen to the sanctimonious speeches of the last couple days, you would not get the impression, or rather one would get the impression that there had been some kind of minimum wage or social safety net. This government introduced a minimum wage. This government has increased the minimum wage. Although it was scoffed at and said to be too little, when you come from zero and you get increases, you get something and then you get increases on it, how can you scoff at it? Especially when the level of the increase is such that it is as much as $100 a week. $100 a week to a poor man cannot be scoffed at. And the promise now is to move it and link the minimum wage to inflation so that every time the inflation rises, the minimum wage will also rise. We had schools with roofs collapsing, although people were being paid to maintain and repair them, but that's another story. But what you had and what we saw, sir, if I could use the language of the Westerns, is somebody riding into town, guns blazing, on a pony called Utility Power, trying to attract the attention of the people in the town. trying to appear to rescue those who did not need rescuing, those who had already been rescued, those whose conditions had already improved, those who are benefiting from the upgrades and the measures being put in place or which have been put in place by the Barbados Labour Party. So that in every regard, people have seen some measure of improvement. Still, however, there is the constant stoking to create discontent, to create dissatisfaction, to make it appear as if not enough has been done or not enough is being done or that nothing has been done, even though people have been significantly, people's conditions have, living conditions have significantly improved. And that is not to say that there is not some element of hardship. It would be impossible coming out of a situation where your economy was not earning any foreign exchange or revenues, where you spent $300 million to support businesses, individuals, families, self-employed persons, in a time of great global difficulty, where finance, society, and economy were all impacted, where you faced a war in the Ukraine and in Gaza, where your shippings, your staples, most people did not realize until the war in Ukraine that the Ukraine was the breadbasket, that staple from corn to wheat and all kinds of foods, and the base for many, the ingredient base for many other products came directly from the Ukraine agricultural sector, so that your supply chains haven't been disrupted by COVID. Warehouses and manufacturing centers shut down. Agricultural workers sent home, so your fields are lying fallow. You don't have production of your agricultural sectors. And really, you have to kickstart the entire economy. So in consequence, you have supply chain disruption. You have high prices. You have inflation existing and rising. And all of that, I have not even mentioned the fact that there is further expense layered into the supply chains, the disrupted and more expensive supply chains, by the fact that you have problems in the Suez Canal, a Panama Canal where people are paying millions of dollars just to get through because they have a water shortage and cannot get people through the canal. So that things reaching Barbados are more expensive. They're taking a longer time to get here. And when a ship bids $4 million to be put ahead of the queue in the Panama Canal, the owners of the ship or the product that is being freighted, they are not absorbing the cost. The cost is being passed on to the consumer on this side of the world. So all of that, this administration has had to deal with, but you are not hearing that. You are not hearing that as part of the narrative when the questions are being asked. You are not hearing that as part of the narrative when the discontent, the political discontent is being stoked, when the dissatisfaction is being stirred up, when it is being made to appear as if nothing has been done to help the public. But the reality is that the vast majority of people in Barbados, and I want to make this point, I have the statistics somewhere. I will get to it, so I'll find it. The government is carrying those who need to be carried. The government has reduced costs and prices where it could intervene in the marketplace and do reductions. The government is subsidizing and cushioning at every level and for everything that it possibly can. It is not the Barbados Labour Party that has swelled, is swelling, or has swelled in the past the numbers of the poor. It is the Democratic Labour Party that swelled the numbers of the poor without putting in any social safety nets or any mechanisms to help all of the people who had been sent home and robbed of their livelihoods, who were not earning, who were not making any money, who didn't know how two ends would be made to meet. Mr. President, sir, Nelson Mandela says that poverty, said, is not a natural phenomenon, that it is a man-made construct, and men can overcome and eradicate it by their actions, or human beings can eradicate and overcome. And that is where this administration is. We looked at all of the poverty created by the callousness in the way the Democratic Labour Party operated at the social level, at the economic level, at the environmental level, at the individual level, at the people level, at the civil servant level, at the level of those who worked in every sector across the country. And in consequence, this administration has had to take steps and measures to address what we found and to reverse what existed. How does one prevent poverty? What causes poverty and how does one prevent it? By growing an economy. And this economy has clearly grown in a situation where I was growing prior to COVID, in a situation where we had experienced no growth over a 10-year period. No growth but high taxation. No jobs, but no social safety nets. No lack of caring or no empathy and understanding on the part of the government of the day. So what is happening now and what is this country doing? We are growing the economy by reference to new capital projects. And you can look at as many indexes as you wish. The test is to drive around Barbados from parish to parish and see. You go up into Warrens, massive construction. You go on the south coast, massive construction. You go on the north, construction. Wherever you go in Barbados, there is construction and business activity going on. And a lot of businesses, it is true, in many instances, have not come back to work very late at night. Why? Because people are ordering online and having the things delivered to their homes and businesses during the day. Because people are working from home so they don't have to go into their offices. So it is a fallacy that because you see a place shut or an office closed, that people are not at work and that there is no business activity. If people were not working, we have spoken and everybody admits that the banks are perhaps the most liquid that they have been ever in history. That money is coming from people's pockets. It represents the saving of the average Barbadian. The people who are getting $75,000 and under, them in there. The credit unions, the same thing. That is exactly how the liquidity came about, because there is economic growth which is benefiting individuals. Individuals are saving, individuals have capital, individuals are looking for greater access to capital to do even more investment. And that relates, because when you talk about doing investment, people think that you mean big investment. And let me pause to say, if you have a hotel that is going to be built, wouldn't you want somebody to buy $1 million in art and put in it? If you have a mall that is going to be built, a person with a small house can't buy a large amount of art, but the concession does not just benefit the business owner or the property owner. The concession benefits the artist because they're buying the art. They're not borrowing it and putting it up. They have to buy it and prove that they bought it in order to get the concession. Do you know how many artists could benefit from $1 million in sales? So when you scoff at these things and you spin them in the negative way and you practice the politics of discontent and the language of dissatisfaction, people have to look beyond that to what the real experience is and what the anticipation is of how a lot of these measures are going to play out. Agro-processing, renewable energy. These are areas, the orange economy. All of these are areas in which we anticipate growth because the sectors are being stimulated, because you have increased tourist arrivals. For instance, try to get a hired car and see how long it takes you. Very, very difficult. You go into restaurants or try to get reservations, you can. And it isn't only tourists, it is Barbadians who are going to these places, from Sheffield to Champers. Wherever you go, Barbadians are purchasing, buying. So this notion that Barbados is not a buzz, really, probably the people who are saying that are staying home at them and they're not actually home at them. But no, none. But certainly, when you leave your residence, there is action in the economy. There is action in the economy. After 4, all of his action is over. 4 kids. So, sir, another way, so you get, and I'm talking about what are the causes of poverty. And I started with the point of an absence of economic growth. So if you have conditions such as existed between 2008 to 2018, it will engender poverty across the economy. And we are seeing that reversed at the moment. What else causes poverty? A lack of economic cushion. Taxes under the Democratic Labour Party were 33.5% in the higher bands. It's now 28.5%, benefiting the people for $75,000 income. The taxes in the lower band moved from 16.5 to 12.5, benefiting people close to the 25,000 band. If you work to up to $35,000, I think it is, you don't pay any taxes at all. And there are those who get the reverse tax credit. In addition to that, these very people who work for up to $75,000 are the ones who are in their homes, the principal asset that they will have during the course of their lifetime, or they're buying homes. You used to get up to $175,000 off of your property tax. also introduced by Barbados Labour Party government. Now, up to $300,000. That benefits the people who work for up to $75,000 and in that range, because they are the ones who are likely to have houses between $300,000 and $500,000. So really, they're only paying land tax on a property tax on $150,000. And if their tax is worth, if their property is worth $300,000, they're paying no tax at all. That is a way in which people who are poor and in which people who have property, and that is a way of encouraging people to own property, and that is a way of easing people's pockets. Again, when you hear the politics of discontent and the language of dissatisfaction, you would not believe that the government has done all of these things, and that includes removing the tax level generally, the debt to GDP. Sorry. I want to get on, sir, to the fact that also to address the incidence of poverty and the level of hardship, inflation, and the cost of living, that government entered into a compact with the private sector for 47 essential items, plus certain sanitary items, that there would not be VAT on some of these issues, and on others, the retailers would hold the prices as low as possible. This has not been done across the world. This saved people, poor people, money. People in the lower income bands, people who earn for up to $75,000, and I would have thought that when you are doing your economic analysis that these are things that would have been apparent. It is essential as well. Then there's been the abolition of road tax. You're going to have to pay gas if you have a vehicle, but you don't pay road tax anymore. So again, that is another tax that has been reduced, and the personal level of personal income tax has come down, but generally, the level of taxation has been reduced from 28%, over 28, to under 23. That is a substantial ease for all Barbadians. In addition, there have been several incentives given to the agricultural sector. VAT on electricity from 17 to 10%, and the lower rate, whatever that is, will be maintained. VAT on freighting to reduce the cost of goods reaching the consumer, removal of VAT. Removal of VAT on gasoline. All of this, because energy is at the base of your economy. And once you reduce the cost of energy, then equally you are reducing costs in your economy, helping to control inflation and reduce the cost of living for the consumers. All of those people, water, our lack of water for sanitary conditions, lack of potable water for proper living conditions. The people in rural Barbados were suffering under the Democratic Labour Party. To date, we had to put in temporary measures, tanks in some communities, water tankers doing delivery. But not only now have water woes throughout rural Barbados been largely reduced to nothing, people can now get tanks from Barbados Water Authority. All of that is unprecedented. These are critical elements in which people are being supported, whether it is actual support, reduction in the amount of taxes being paid. And now we are hearing these are things that improve the condition of nurses, of teachers, of police. And in the last budget, we are told that these officers, teachers, nurses, police, will now be put on the travel scheme so that they can get loans without interest-free loans, which is a significant help in terms of your general transport costs and in terms of your expenditure. Because if you borrowed from the private sector, and I don't know what is the rate on a vehicle loan, 10%, 15%, I have no idea, then you now don't have to pay that interest at all. So that is a significant saving. For the first time ever, support has been given to small entrepreneurs, to people who own their own businesses, the small man and the poor man who is just trying to do a little hustle. Vendors have been decriminalized and support given to them through NIS that they have never previously had. And let us not forget that education is a significant pillar of poverty reduction. And that is one of the areas in which the Democratic Labour Party sought to deprive the average Barbadian. When people had to pay for their education, UE enrollment dropped by 70%, particularly among women. That meant that that whole generation of people could not move upward, could not get an opportunity for upward social mobility, could not help their families, could not lift them out of poverty. And not only did they deprive them of the opportunity of a university education, the same free education that they had, they refused to extend to others. Not only that, but they did not have the training programs in place that this administration has put in place through Coursera. 45,000, how many people is it? 45,000 people. So all of the people that the Democratic Labour Party laid off had to go home, suck salt, or find some way. But they were not treated to learning, unlearning, and relearning, and equipping themselves for the job market and for new opportunities. Digitization. The government's digitization program is moving apace. In this new world, digitization is a major means of combating poverty. If you have those skills, if you have digital access, if you can work in that area, then you can get decent work. Job opportunities are available to you. Senator Boyce has spoken, Senator Boyce Andwele has spoken eloquently to the support and the difference that is being made in the life of the disabled. We were told a couple of days ago that, we were told that the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act represented a leap forward because it gave persons in Barbados an opportunity to land, access to land at affordable prices, 10 cents a square foot. But yet, Hope is being much maligned. And what is Hope doing? Giving free land. This is not subsidized land. This is not land at 10 cents a square foot. This is not a private-public partnership. It is a government entity which asks for an audit to check certain things, and where we have been promised full investigation and full disclosure because there are challenges. But Hope is intended to give Barbadians, and every house in the Hope program gives to Barbadians, all of those who work in the income band for $75,000, free land. It has never been done in Barbados before. We've had subsidized land, we've had low-cost land, but never before have people been told this land is yours free. Just pay for the house. And on top of that, the pioneering work done in solar water heaters shows us that the placement of the panels on the roof to generate renewable energy not only helps us in respect of issues relating to climate, but creates a revenue stream or an income saving for the individuals who own those homes. But you see, hope has to be maligned, because if it isn't, then you are not told the extent to which people will benefit from free land under this program. And no, it is not intended that NHC should build all the houses themselves. For years, since the 1970s, the NHC and successive governments have used public-private partnerships to bring private companies and build developments across the country. That is how it is done. So we don't have to be told that this is a method that can be used. It is a method that has been used for years. So you see, the Democratic Labour Party talks the poor talk, but the Barbados Labour Party does its utmost through policy, instruments, and economic and financial measures to ensure that people are taken out of poverty, given decent work, and a high quality of living, though the politics of discontent would not allow you to recognize that. I know, Mr. President, that I have perhaps about 10 minutes left. Yes, okay. I have indicated, sir, the kinds of measures that have been put in place by this administration to make a difference to the small, to the poor, to the middle class, to the vulnerable, and how those measures have affected positive change and are helping, how it is creating greater equality and breaking down social barriers. But I want to ask her a series of questions that I think we need to contemplate as a country, not as a government, as a country, because I started by saying that it isn't just a matter of picking at each other's policy and saying, I did this, you didn't do that, you did this, you haven't done that, even though these are legitimate political points, especially given the level of hardship that was stirred by the politics and the policies of the Democratic Labour Party. But I think that beyond that, we need to ask ourselves a few questions. What can a government of a small, open economy reasonably do to cushion its population from the polycrises which are global in nature and which are impacting the marketplace? Sir, the reality is that Barbados does not exist in a vacuum. You exist in the context of international market conditions. And until we are able to determine how those cushions are created so that they are sustainable, then we are going to see recurring incidents and areas of poverty. We are going to continue to see systemic cycles of poverty. And to address this, the Barbados Labour Party government has sought to deal with price reduction, to deal with the most vulnerable, to deal with the cost of living and inflation, and to deal with the agricultural and food sector. How do small island developing states, which are price takers of energy products and food products, create economic growth, reduce the cost of living, and keep inflation to a minimum? And this government has determined that part of its answer to that policy question is that we will transition to green energy. We will have a blue-green bank, that we will address water issues. And that is how, along with other measures which I mentioned earlier, What are the underpinnings of sustainable development, such as would attract the policy attention of a government so that it can be sustained over time? What is the level of infrastructure that you're going to put in place? And government has continued, whether it is the repair of bridges, whether it is the repair and maintenance of roads, whether it is keeping up the transport system. What is the level of infrastructure, and is it of a type that it is prepared for exogenous, particularly in this case, environmental shocks? Can it resist those shocks? Can it recover or withstand those shocks? And how long does it take you to replace your infrastructure after an external shock? These are some of the questions which are important if you are having a discussion on poverty. And I was amazed that the senators for the Democratic Labour Party felt that it was all right not to make any suggestions. That is, in my view, because as ever, they are bereft of ideas and bereft of policy solutions, devoid of answers which make a difference for the public. So it is easy to stoke the discontent. It is easy to speak the language of dissatisfaction. It is much harder to do the hard work and the policy suggestions and the instruments that really make a difference. But this administration has brought a level of vision and action to what it is doing in order to save the poor, to save the country. What are the measures needed to stop systemic poverty? And I've spoken to jobs. I've spoken to education. I've spoken to land ownership. How do we create in a post-colonial society and a post-slavery society where the majority of your population still does not have access to intergenerational wealth? Because that is the secret, you know. There are people in this country, both black and white, but a majority happen not to be black, who will never, whose children will not have, sorry, let me frame this. The idea is to creating intergenerational poverty is that one generation stands on the shoulders of the generation before them. That they are able to live a quality life that is considerably improved from that of their grandparents and their parents. The challenge is that when you look around the country, that we are not finding enough people to build with whom we have built as successive administrations, although the Democratic Labour Party did a lot to rob people of that opportunity. As successive generations, successive governments, intergenerational wealth that truly makes a difference so that the children can pass on serious wealth to their children, so that well-being does not stop in the first generation that got a bungalow or a motor car, and then after that they aren't doing well again. And we are doing it through proper jobs, decent work, through education, through removing the other elements that create systemic poverty. Those are some of the fundamental questions that we have to ask and keep asking at a country. What are the policy interventions that are needed at the individual and community level, so that when you go into communities, you are not seeing communities that are living in poverty, where people are getting water from a community tap, or where they're stealing electricity, wiring electricity from one house to the other and so on, because they do not have access. What are the individual interventions? What are the community interventions? And for people who live, for instance, in St. Michael East, We have indicated that for the long problem of lack of sanitary conditions and absence to water, that we are turning to address that after it has been repeatedly promised, promise made, promise about to be kept. Mr. President, I have gone through systematically the promises made and the promises we have kept. I have gone through systematically the measures being put in place by this administration, which has made a difference and is making a difference. And I do not think that the answer to the ambitious target of 2,000 houses per annum is to reduce the target, but to increase your effort to get to the target and to determine what stakeholders and partners you need in order to make that happen. You cannot have 17,000 people on a waiting list for houses and be reducing your target. You have to increase your targets, but you have to find the ingenuity to deliver. And that is a final element, Mr. President, that in the comments made over the course of the last few weeks as these matters have been debated, the Prime Minister has promised improvement in delivery and implementation. And I think that that is a key issue in relation to poverty intervention strategies and maintaining your development trajectories. It isn't the conceptualization and the creation of new ideas. It is the delivery and implementation, the quality of the delivery and implementation, the speed of the delivery and implementation, which creates the difference for those who are waiting to benefit from the policy. Mr. President, I started by making the point that we came out of a period of economic, financial, social, and environmental slavery and bondage. A period of political and social deprivation. I conclude, sir, by saying we are not going back. We have sighted the promised land and we are headed toward it. There will be no turning back to what existed before. And despite the politics of discontent, despite the rhetoric about poverty, what we are doing is creating sustained and sustainable prosperity for all Barbadians. That is the policy objective, and it is something behind which every single member of this Barbados Labour Party is throwing their skills, their talent, their energy, and their time. At every turn, Mr. President, we have been warned that we cannot achieve our objectives, that we are going to increase taxes, that all manner of harm is going to befall the public. It has not happened yet. And by the will of God, sir, it will not happen. Nelson, I quoted Nelson Mandela, and I closed with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela said that we have to recognize the world is in a hurry for action, vision, and delivery. Mr. President, the government is in a hurry to deliver for the people of Barbados the action and vision which we know will bring about the sustained prosperity of which we speak. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Senator Thompson. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Permission to remain seated, please.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm asking to remain seated, but I never thought in a million years that I would have to be doing that again this year. However, I give God thanks for life. I also would like to say and thank whoever is responsible for getting the elevator working. Last year, I started my presentation by saying, please for a little help with the elevator. And I'd like to thank whoever was responsible. I know the Clerk of Parliament was the driving force, I believe. I should say no. I believe the Clerk of Parliament was the driving force to getting that up and running in terms of staying the course. And of course, the government in relation to getting the elevator. I am claustrophobic by getting in it, as long as somebody with me. I can't take the stairs. So I thank you. And I also thank you, sir, the Clerk of Parliament, and Mr. Ernest King, for the stool that I now have that was brought for me on Monday for my legs not having, my feet not having to be on the ground. I actually, when it came, I got a little emotional because I thought, well, thank you very much. Sir, if I can just get permission to sit a little further back because of the way the stool is. This afternoon, sir, I will be examining a number of areas primarily as they relate to how the wheels of justice turn in Barbados. I was looking forward to and hoping that that particular ministry, I'm calling it the Attorney General's ministry, the ministry of, I don't know what it is, the Attorney General's office, I believe that's the correct title. It didn't make the well, and I regret that because I find that unfortunate because I believe that there are a number of issues that I am going to raise that would have been undoubtedly addressed in that forum. But be that as it may, I will proceed. Sir, in this year's estimates under head number 30, that is Attorney General, and program number 242, which is Administration of Justice, the program statement is as follows: to ensure the court system and the administration of justice functions speedily and effectively. Now, I do not believe, look, it's already happening. It is already happening. I look across at Senator Nichols, and he is smiling and chuckling because there is no attorney that sees that is not going to do exactly what he did, because I did it too. Because the wheels of justice are not functioning speedily and effectively or as well as they could, or, well, he's given me help with at all. And, you know, that is not a point finger thing that I'm doing. Mr. Nichols can do that. But certainly, I believe that there are certain things that need to be said because in this very same Senate, recently, there was talk about fees for lawyers needed to be adjusted, and lawyers this and lawyers that. I will get to it specifically, sir. You will expect me to deal with it at some point. But in order for justice to be speedy and effective, there needs to be certain things in place. If they're not in place, the pieces cannot fit. They will not fit. But for purposes of the estimates, the government has to put that type of statement in its document because it sounds good, and that's what the intention of the government ought to be. It should be effective and it should be speedy. But there's such a thing as intention, and then there's reality. As a practicing Queen's Counsel, and I said Queen's Counsel, I did not say Senior Counsel, I did not say King's Counsel. I consider myself a Queen's Counsel. I wish to highlight a few areas that affect the intention and will continue to adversely affect the intention of government for justice to be effective and speedy if that which is going on is allowed to persist unabated. I'm going to talk about the Supreme Court. These days, the word backlog has become synonymous with the words the Supreme Court of Barbados, particularly the civil and probate divisions. Now, that is extremely disturbing for a number of reasons, Mr. President. Now, let me be clear from the outset. This is not an exercise of bashing the staff of the Registration Department or any of the judges of the Supreme Court. I want to make that clear and go on the record to make that clear. But I do believe that this long outstanding issue needs to be addressed for real, because there's been a lot of long talk on the issue. These days, when somebody tell you, all right, let me go to court, you scam out. Not a problem. It's going to take a number of years to get going. So I'm asking, what is the government's plan to deal with the vexing backlog? Is it an increase in the funds to the Supreme Court? When I looked at the estimates for the Supreme Court for 24-25, it shows an increase in that total sub-program from $7.3 million for 2023-2024 to $10.1 million for 2024-2025. So that sounds like a $3 million increase. But the thing is that the heads such as maintenance of property and machinery and equipment both had increases of $1 million each. So therein ends the $3 million increase. So that doesn't look as if that's the idea for the backlog. So is it an increase in funds for computer software for the registration department? Okay. When I looked at the estimates under the registration department, which falls under the Attorney General office and is actually the administrative arm for the Supreme Court, it shows that $365,000 was allocated to purchase computer software from 2023 to 2024. But Mr. President, here's the thing. It's been reduced to $110,000 in 2024-2025. Now, I am not a computer person. I'm not technical. I don't know if that means that what worked in 2023-24 is still working in 24-25 and you're just updating. I'm trying to understand what the plan is. I don't know if the challenge that is happening in the Supreme Court is in any way related to software. I do not know, but I know there is a problem. We have had an increase of Supreme Court judges to 13. In recent times, the court list has been reduced from an average of 20 cases per day to 10. But then recently, I saw one of the judges had a court list of 14 cases allocated to her. And these are cases per day, not per week. This is per day, 10, 8, 9 per day, 5 days a week. We have judicial assistants allocated to the judge, but here's the thing. The judges are sharing the judicial assistants. So if 2 judges need a judicial assistant, somebody's gonna get trumped. So you have them working every day, 8, 10, 14 cases. Judicial assistants are being shared, and I am not sure, but I've been made to understand that the judicial assistants are not necessarily persons who have been practicing or called for many years. They might be people who are new to the profession, which is fine, except that when you have a complicated matter, somebody who's now coming out of law school will not be able to bring to it the same expertise, knowledge, and gravity. Oh my goodness, Senator Nichols is on point. He needs to come and sit next to me, sir, today. I don't know, he helped me in today, sir. Oh, let me go on record, Mr. Sir. I forgot to acknowledge that Senator Nichols assisted me up today, including bringing in my handbag. I want it on the record, sir. Having said that, sir, and I'm not trying to take work from a junior attorney. I'm just keeping it real. If you have a complicated matter with a judge, they need somebody who can get it done quickly and efficiently, speedily and effectively, because they still have cases to do every day. So if you do not make the salary attractive to somebody who has 5 or 10 years, you're always going to get somebody who's now coming out who wants work. I said this when we debated the bill to introduce the new judges. You've got to get serious with what you're doing. And a judge, every judge should have their own judicial assistant. That's just a fact. There can be no sharing, because you're either going to have a judicial assistant that is torn between who they're going to work for, or worse, in our world, seniority trumps everything else. So if you're working for 2 judges and one is senior to the other, our way of doing things is we acknowledge the senior judge. Even if the other judge has a complicated matter that could do with some assistance. Let's be real. Judges, anybody has sent me with a message, but I'm not carrying any brief for any judge. But if you need judges to perform and function, you have to make it make sense. You cannot continue with a situation where you have to give a judge leave to go and do decisions. What is that? That is not making any sense. It's not fair. It really isn't fair. You have to give them the space to function. 10 cases and decisions, and then you put a time limit of 6 months on the decisions. No. And you have lawyers complaining for judges, which I think is abhorrent. I think the employer of a judge should deal with a judge. I do not think it should be in the purview of attorneys to make complaints about judges. That's me. I don't know if I can get licks for that, but if it has to do with productivity in every other environment, the employer deals with it. How we get to be in it? How? No. And don't even tell me about letting the client do it. Because then you want that same judge to deliver a judgment for you? How? No. Mr. President, I continue, please. I also believe that for the system to work, there cannot be people in an office making decisions for people who have to work the system. I believe that there ought to be serious, frank, and comprehensive consultation with the persons who have to work the system, i.e. the honorable judges of the Supreme Court of Barbados. We will never know all of the issues that they have unless we have them sit and tell us what they are, so that you can create an environment that they can produce. They can tell you if what you're asking them to do is reasonable and doable. But to keep going over the same thing over and over, you know what they say, if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, somebody is mad. And I don't mean vexed or angry. We need to include those persons who know what, and it doesn't only necessarily have to be the judges either. All the various stakeholders to getting justice to be effective and speedy need to be consulted with. Apart from being the courteous thing to do, it's the logical and practical thing to do. They're the persons who have to work the system. I'm going to segue here, sir, and move from the Supreme Court and go to court annex mediation. That has been bantered about in Barbados for approximately 10 years. And when it was first heralded, it was heralded as a viable way to assist with the very backlog that we keep talking about. It was supposed to make it better. Right now, our backlog is worse. I have not been able to find a subhead in the estimates for mediation. I have found a heading in the emoluments for a mediation coordinator. I am aware that the mediation takes place in the new Sir David Simmons and Sir Henry Ford complex. I can't remember. I don't know. What do we call it? Again, Senator Nichols has helped me. Sir, did you hear him? What is it? Seriously, Henry Ford and David Simmons Judicial and Legal Services Complex. That is straight from Senator Gregory. I don't know his middle name, Nichols, sir. Let's call him Isaac. All right, Senator Thompson. So we have this, we have been given the mediation court annex program persons have been given the top floor within which to work. But that's all about all it has been. And I have a problem with that, because if you are serious about getting down the backlog, what's the word? Finance that which you need to make it happen. Let us be serious. We are reaching an untenable place where we have a situation, sir, where we have decisions that are heard by judges who have retired. We have yes. We have situations where some matters have been heard. They've then been restarted and heard again. We had to bring in judges to do that, part-time judges. But you know the problem with that, Mr. President? If your matter is outstanding 6 years, and you are of a certain age, there got some people in this room today that 5 minutes from now, they're not going to remember what happened 5 minutes ago. Your hand is up, not you? Your hand is up, Senator Thompson? Okay. And it's not a joke. So you're asking persons to recreate what they said already, hope that they are staying true to what they said before. But what happens if they forget? How is that ensuring that justice is effective and speedy? Worse yet, Mr. President, what if one of the witnesses or parties to the proceeding made the mistake and pass away? What is that about? We need, on a serious level, legislation that will deal with these types of matters, because we have some retired judges that have the dubious honor of having double-digit cases outstanding. It is not a joke. I have a colleague that I know extremely well who has 90-something-year-old clients. I can't get a decision. I'm not only talking about part heard, I'm talking about judges who are sitting, who for whatever reason are unable to deliver their decisions. This is not effective justice. It is not speedy. It is dangerous, and it's unfair. So there has to be something that deals with those types of scenarios. Part heard, and then retirement, or for whatever reason, you don't have a decision. Because it impacts family matters. You have a matrimonial home, somebody in, somebody out, you can't get a decision. You have, all right. Sir. So I encourage the government to relook and recommit itself to the court annex mediation, and we need, in that regard, we need to have a proper structure in place for mediation, since the current use of a practice direction under each Chief Justice is slowing down the development of mediation in Barbados. And when the practice direction expires, there's no basis on which mediation can continue. That's flawed. So in that case, you would need to put legislation in place, not a practice direction that it has an expiration date. There's a need to put some form of restorative justice in place so that once you have people with disputes, alternative forms of resolution can be used other than criminal sanctions. So you have domestic violence situations, or you have civil matters or family situations. You also have to protect the environment that exists at the Sir David Simmons and Sir Henry Ford legal complex justice. Because, y'all know what I mean, I'm gonna say the complex. Because when you have a mediation and you have parties, we need security. In my training as a mediator, we have been told about parties. One party wanted to go to the bathroom. The woman went to the bathroom. The husband said, I want to go to the bathroom. Nobody paid attention to that. And the husband went and killed the wife in the bathroom. So we can't be doing mediation without security. Not here, not here, not here, not here, not here. But we need security. We need to, the money that's allocated for mediations that run a minimum of 3 hours at a time, which has nothing to do with the pre-mediation work that goes into a mediation. We have persons who don't do mediations determining the cost. So we have $500 per party, which is ridiculous. If it's part of the court system, the disparity in the fees is too great to attract qualified persons to conduct the mediations. You have qualified people who have stopped being paid $500 for anything a long time ago. You have persons who do mediations that if they go to a taxation, the registrar of the Supreme Court will start at $1,000 an hour for that person, but they're qualified to do mediations. But you think they're gonna come in? And there's a lot of talk about doing things pro bono and all kinds of, nobody don't mind doing pro bono. But this thing about disrespecting people's expertise, time is flawed. There is a thing called service to country. Every one of us in here are doing it at $16.75 and 79 cents. I know the number by heart every time. Y'all know y'all like when I do it. So let me just do it. 16.75 and 79 cents, Senator Thompson, up from 14.79 and 7 cents. This is who we are. And we have documents like this to deal with. So I want everyone to see cameras. And we have a government who is not playing with the amount of legislation that they are churning. And that's not criticism, that's a fact. Now, on that note, we have to get real with how we're doing things in these two houses of parliament. Every time we come into a house of parliament, there should be somebody from the Parliamentary Services, CPC, no, what is it called? The Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office here with us. Because when we do amendments, and this Senate does amendments, we ask questions, we go into committee deep. It's not supposed to be the responsibility of the clerks of parliament to get the amendments to the government printer. Who are you talking to? Legal drafting is something that you pay to go and learn. It's a serious thing. An and, a the, a but, a comma, a space makes a difference in our world. I have not seen an ad for a legal drafter in a long, long, long time. But what I've seen is the figure for consultants for that department. I'm confused. I get confused early, easy. Let me tell you why, sir. I was born with blue eyes. I had blue eyes up to a year. I feel that has affected my brain. Sir. We have to have properly trained, with respect to mediation, I continue, we have to have properly trained persons in the forefront who can promote mediation and help with the growth and development of mediation. There must be a sensitization of the communities and court to the communities and court personnel. This thing, I know we have some colleagues who make people feel that they shouldn't do mediation, not understanding the importance of mediation and the usefulness of mediation because they're not educated. That's not good. We need to focus. If we are serious about the backlog, fix the court annex mediation program, sir. I will now go on to the e-filing system known as Courier. Another problem with the effect, the efficacy of is the digitization. You cannot be implementing things that don't work and then get vexed when it doesn't work. You can't. You know, the traditional system of manual filing, you are filing immediately on site. That if the document required the registrar's signature, you get back the document in 2 days. With e-filing, sometimes documents take weeks and in some cases months to be processed and filed. So then you have a situation where if you have a statutory time limit, you are challenged through no fault of your own. If you email the registry about technical issues, there's a position, they don't always acknowledge receipt or respond. If you call, well, I don't know, the government implemented some way you can call and get action. I am yet to experience anybody picking up the phone for me when I call the departments I have to deal with on the number that we're given. Now, let me explain that. It is not that persons are not at the places. And if you're fortunate enough to know somebody who goes up there, you can get a number. And the staff will help you and stay on the phone with you. That was my experience with corporate affairs recently. But the number you're given on the website and everywhere else to call for help, no one answers. That's a joke. And for some reason, there's this mentality that you cannot take it in person. What do you mean? So the online isn't working. The e-filing isn't working, but you can't file it online. How? Or you're being rationed documents for filing. So these days, I have been told, if you go to NIS and you want forms for what? Your employees what? NIS contribution, you're given 2 or 3 because they want you to go online. But the portal don't work regular and it don't work well. and it don't always upload things. I am bashing nobody, right? I'm just saying, if you want these things to happen, they need to be working. You know, one of the worst sites, portals that we are asked to deal with. What is government printery? Can anybody tell me they can get anything off of that? If you can, show me how. It is one of the worst. I cannot get anything off of it. But we have a password to use it. I don't know why that is so, but it needs not to be so, because you're telling us that we are going into the whatever century we're going into, and we need 21st. Oh, you know, because you're born. So, yes, the 21st century, we're to go online, but nothing is working. I know a colleague very close to me who filed a document on the 7th of March. It has not been seen, processed, or filed. When we have deadlines, and if you don't do something by a certain time, it is not dismissed or struck out. You can't be doing that to people. There's a draft order he has that is approved, that is required for signature by the relevant person in the registry. That was filed on March 18th. He has heard nothing. Now, let me just say, for the record, for all who can hear, you see our acting registrar right now? I tip my hat to her. She came in, and she ain't playing. This current acting registrar, she's registrar now? But I beg my pardon. The registrar now, you could call her name. Miss Sharon Dean has stepped in, and she has hit the ground running, and I take my hat off to her. She's trying for truth. She's emailing us and letting us know what's going on. She is trying. I give her kudos on the record. May she continue and not get overwhelmed. Easy Pay is another story for another time, Mr. President. It want Jesus. That's what I'm going to say about Easy Pay. If I say Easy Pay want Jesus, Senator Thompson in training to be holier than she is now. You understand what I mean? Yes. Mr. President, through you, I just wanted to find out. Okay, it needs Jesus. It needs Jesus. It needs Jesus. And the thing is, Korea has been in place now since 2021, early 2022. It's not getting better. And there are some lawyers who tell me that they say that the process has failed. I'm moving off from that. That needs work. If that's how we're doing business, it needs work. You see the probate division, sir? I filed an application for a young lady who was, at the time of filing 2-3 years ago, was a minor. Fees were paid on an application that is done on behalf of a minor. The child is now an adult. The application has to be done over because the grant can no longer be issued to the parties who applied on her behalf because she's an adult. Who is paying for that? I just asking. Can I file it? Who's paying for that, Mr. President? Or the housewife that I worked for. Notice I said a housewife. So what that means is her husband or her deceased husband was the one who dealt with the finances. For almost a year, she had no access to the bank accounts because the only thing that a bank will release when there's a death is the funeral expenses on the production of a bill. What is she supposed to do if her life was her husband and her husband has passed? That department is overworked and understaffed. But as a colleague of mine recently opined in a newspaper, there are millions of dollars tied up in that probate division. And I'm not talking about fees. I'm talking about money for parties. I'm talking about money for the economy. And I'm talking about money for the government coffers, Mr. President. Estates generate income. If we can get the... When I first started to practice about 10 years ago, all who laugh, sir, there has to be sanctioning for the persons who just laugh. All like Senator Barrett, everybody laugh. But you know that Dr. Hazel laugh, she believe it. I love her dearly. To the day I die, I can appreciate that young lady. Anyway, sir, when I first started practice, grants were issued between 1 to 3 months. 6 months was considered long. Now, if you get back anything in 3 years, you get it back early. That's wrong. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in those departments. You just have to bring more staff. And on that note, I understand the whole concept of supersession and all of that, but when you are transferring people, you have to train them or don't bring them. Our area, especially civil and probate, is a complex area. So do not bring people who do not know what they're doing, or if you tell them this is a black pen, they're not gonna see that it is silver because you taught them black. You have to train them. It's reasonable. Because you can have a situation where because people hear that the person signed with an X, they feel that your affidavit should say you read it over to them. But the reason the person signed with an X is because the person had a stroke and can't use their hand. But you were taught that if you see X, it means the person is blind. Help me, Jesus. Or they can't read. That's flawed. Train the people. Pay who there or who retired to come in and train. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are people who know what they're doing. Pay them. Let the registry run efficiently and speedily as the Attorney General's office says it's supposed to do. Okay. I'm leaving the Supreme Court. I'm going to NIS. I've been the chairman of the NIS through many administrations. I'm saying that right now. Many. What did I say? NIS Tribunal, chairman of a severance payment tribunal for many years, for truth. When I heard it the other day, it was heading towards like 20 years or something like that. It's a long time. But you know how it is, 10 and 20, leave me. So I have been there for a minute. I heard the minister responsible for Social Security say during the, what do they call their estimates debate? Y'all know what I mean. He mentioned that there's going to be a move to put officers in the field to help people register, especially self-employed people. I think, with respect, that the move should be to increase your compliance officers. I don't know if they're still called compliance officers. That's how long I've been in the system. I see a definition. I see a reference to an inspector, an NIS inspector. I'm not sure if it's one of the same thing. Compliance means the person who is making sure that employers are doing what they're supposed to do. I remember in the early days I had a compliance officer in me every 6 months, 4 months. I got 2 members of staff at the time. But we have situations where persons are not being reviewed. I've had a woman appear before me where an employer was trying to pay her severance with bananas here because she worked for him on a farm. And because she was illiterate, he felt that he could pull that. Did I tell y'all heard it just said bananas? That could not happen or should not happen if that employer was being checked by a compliance officer. I've also cried, got emotional, but not cried. My entire tribunal got emotional when a man came, very chuffed that he has been paying his NIS on time since the 1980s. And he had to close because he was a casualty of COVID. And that man come and appeared before me, and he was a majority shareholder, you know what I mean? But he was playing as an employee. He could not get severance. No, he could come to me, could have a conflict of interest. But if there was a compliance officer, and I said to him, didn't anybody come in and check your records? No, they didn't have to. I was paying on time. That man cried in my tribunal, sir. He broke our heart, no lie. And his house was in trouble because the mortgage company was coming, talking. Let me read it. The NIS portal, one of the few that you can actually open sometimes, says, the quick, under frequently asked questions. May I, sir? I'm from my phone. Suppose I'm a shareholder in a company. Am I self-employed? If you're a majority shareholder in a limited liability company and involved in the day-to-day operations of the company, you may be seen as self-employed. You should check with who? The National Insurance Department to confirm your insurability status. There is a vast difference between self-employed and an employee. You are treated differently. You ain't getting severance. Wrong. Bring more compliance officers, and on that note, let's be clear. When the compliance officers come in and say that Senator, no, I didn't call you name, because you helped me out. Let me offer you, that Mr. John Brown needs to be dealt with pursuant to the legislation. Not because you know him and you play golf for him and you know him and he's a campaign contributor, or you to take his name off the list, you know. Don't take his name off the list, deal with him. And on that note, Mr. President, may I respectfully suggest to the government, you see these non-national companies that we encourage to come and bring money to the economy and invest and hire people? We should be, based on what I've seen over the years, especially on a certain Gold Coast area. It happens a lot along the Gold Coast. They come, they set up. They either pay the people all their money in their hand and don't pay any NIS. So when they leave, the person comes for severance, but no money has been paid for them. Or you have a situation where they just leave. That happened a lot post-COVID. Post-COVID was something to see here, Mr. President. We should be making our nationals make a deposit to an account, an interest-bearing account, that stays there until they leave. So that if they leave, if they abscond, we have the NIS, we have the severance to pay their employees. If it is a situation where they wind down properly, the money is already there. But to let people come and leave, what happens is the fund will pay the employees, but then there's nobody paying it back. If we let every employer get away with paying it back. Yes, they get a 25% rebate, let them get the rebate. But if we don't manage that process, the fund will dwindle and we will have nothing. The fund will not be doing what it's supposed to do when you look at it globally. Non-nationals should pay, and like how we pay money into court for matters. They can't get it, they can't get nothing. It's there, it's interest bearing. So that means the government is making money on the interest, and it's there in case the person absconds. If they don't abscond, it's there. We don't have to pull from the fund because the fund is there for people who can. Let's talk about the Employment Rights Tribunal, one of my favorite topics. That is a tribunal that, when I look at the estimates, it has not, and listen, the people who put this thing together are pretty amazing. It confuses me. I stay in my lane. I try very hard to fight it and work with it. But I'm not seeing an increase for that tribunal in the estimates. But that tribunal, since it has been established, now is supposed to deal with discrimination at work, sexual harassment, and I'm hearing the concessions too. Same tribunal. One set of staff though, one registrar, one secretary. No chairman has been appointed since the previous chairman resigned in March 2023. They have one, it's supposed to be one, according to the legislation, is one chairman and two deputies. I don't understand that disparity. Bring everybody chairman. Severance, there are 4 chairmen. Each chairman is assigned a tribunal secretary. Each tribunal is assigned a transcriptionist, and off we go to the races. This employment, and the thing about NIS, we can do decisions on the spot if it's straightforward. So we can give somebody who comes in today their decision today, and the machinery starts to run for them to get paid their severance. It is when you have to do a decision that it becomes complicated and it takes longer, but that's NIS. The thing about the Employment Rights Tribunal is that once it gets there, it's contentious because there's a process through the Labor Department that if it can be settled, it doesn't get to the tribunal. So you have a situation where we have people doing decisions for contentious matters who are being paid. The chairman gets $310 per month and around $150 a hearing. They get more than me, sir, and NAS. They're giving ERT more money. It's an abomination, really. The other 8 members, he does, we say, we could never be accused of doing this for money because we don't get paid money. We get paid stuff. All right, the stipend paid is, the other 8 members, including 2 deputy chairpersons, receive $120 per sitting and approximately $230 per month. Some sittings last up to 3 hours. There have been no adjustments for the 9 years that the ERT has been in operation. There's 1 secretary to serve 3 panels. Therefore, only 1 case can be heard at a time. You see how you're encouraging backlog in another environment, another justice environment? You already got backlog going on in the Supreme Court. By the very setup of this Employment Rights Tribunal, you are going to have backlog. I am personally familiar with a case where the person was unfairly dismissed going on 6, 7 years ago. His matter has not come off the hearing yet. How can it? That too. May appeal can't get a transcript. And you can only appeal on matters of law, and an employee who has not been working, has no money, needs to appeal. There is no lawyer who's going to appeal without fees. I don't care who them is. You do not go without fees. Not appeal. Appeal is a different world. You cannot go to the appeal court like you're a joke. It cannot happen. You're not going to do it. So the government might need to look at setting up some kind of fund to assist persons with appeals, or set up a set of lawyers who they pay to help people who appeal anything from the Employment Rights Tribunal, because the cases that are the star cases with the Employment Rights Tribunal are the people with the money. They are the ones who can appeal. So you get cases by, you're associating the employment rights situation with the Tricia Watson case, the Liz Thompson case, because it was a signature case, because of the parties that were in it, because they can afford, and they go all the way up to the CCJ. Don't let us play. You need to, you see why you can't get away with Dwight Nichols? We start hard. I ain't calling nobody name, he calling people name. Okay, the total, my information is, the total staff complement is three, the registrar, a secretary, and a clerk. The registrar has the staff, his functions are unclear, but he's provided for, I believe, in the emoluments. 9 years on the ERT, still has no dedicated meeting space. That's another set of madness. So the majority of hearings are conducted on Zoom. You can do that with straightforward cases. You could even do that with several, but you see where you need to see people's body language and things? This is not tenable. But now you must have somewhere for the people to do. You have somewhere to go. And then severance. Employment rights is contentious. Part of the hearing of a tribunal in a court setting is body language. Or when somebody sends something across the table, you see that and want to, you pay attention. You want something to say, Mr. President? As I said, there's no chairman since March 2023. The question I have been asked is, when last were cases assigned to the 2 remaining panels? The panels can only work when cases are assigned. What system does the tribunal use to determine priority of hearings? All current members are highly skilled, experienced, and qualified. That is not a lie. The chairman was the former chairman was a high court judge, maybe Court of Appeal in another jurisdiction, I can't remember. The sitting acting, I don't even know if she's acting. She's highly qualified. The other one is well-versed in employment and industrial relations law, and was recently elevated to partner in his firm. There's talk about doing a proposed permanent court for industrial relations matters. You must ensure that the remuneration will attract the right people. Decisions of the tribunal, as I said, are appealed to the Court of Appeal. Therefore, the decisions have to be of a quality to withstand the scrutiny of our appellate courts, and they have been able to do so. That means that chairpersons have to write the decisions for the Court of Appeal. The minister recently boasted that there currently is a 4-0 record at the appellate level in favor of the tribunal, which is testament to the quality of the decisions. Yet chairpersons are not compensated for the time spent researching and writing decisions. Sometimes they have to leave their practice and travel overseas and be away for 2 weeks to do decisions so that they're not distracted. And you can tell me that you're paying somebody $200, $300 per month plus $100 and something for a hearing that lasts a minimum of 3 hours. Yet we have persons that get a lot, like $30,000 a thing. I'd be confused by those things, Mr. President. Anyway, there are no research tools provided for the tribunal. So I don't know if any of the funds allocated to the tribunal, I don't see anything other than payment for the staff and the members of the tribunal. So I don't see anything for VLEX or LexisNexis or Carry Law or any of the things that they would need to do research. And let me say again that this is just the employment rights part of it, but they have been assigned sexual harassment matters, discrimination at work matters, and concessions. You can't, that's not tenable. You need to, we have the potential to make things make sense and make them work. They need a location, they need to establish panels, you need to give them a secretariat, you need to pay people properly, because people take pride in what they do, but there will come a point where you're gonna lose good people because they just can't sustain their lives anymore, where it takes such a chunk of their time, but they're not paid for it. They have to be able to make a reasonable living. Nobody's saying that they are going to make $1 million, but you have to stop disrespecting people's service and their quality of expertise, Mr. President. And that's across the board, starting from in here, because we are doing legislation, but according to the legislation, we are not legislators. So we will never get a pension, even though we are here, like we live here. Like this season here now, we going home at night, like we live here. God, pay attention to who giving you quality service. We read. You don't come in here and fall asleep and pretend. We debate. So, Senator King, because he listening, can make reference to something that Senator Nurse said, because we listening. Be paying attention. I move off from the Employment Rights Tribunal. I'm calling anybody, you know, y'all could do better, we need to do better. Find the money, reallocate funds, make it make sense. Because what you don't want, sir, is diluted work. Or because somebody refuses to dilute their work, they will resign. I'm asking you, sorry, telling you, you're losing people to resignation because their situation is no longer sustainable. When you find you're spending more time doing decisions for these quasi-tribunals and they're not being paid to make it make sense, you're going to lose them. That's not good. So fix it. I have something real quick to say. I'm going to look at my friend, Senator Boyce. Please, sir, Mr. President, I asked about it last year. I'm asking again, what are we doing about parking for the disabled? I am currently semi-disabled. I do not park in disabled parking because I do not have a sticker. But I'm tired seeing able-bodied persons parking in disabled spots. We need to deal with it. We need to be locking up people for it. We need to be sending people to court. I offered to do the job. Nobody wants to pay me. I'm done with that. On a serious note, me trying to get out and trying to can't bend knee, walk with the walking cane. This is not right. They do not do it overseas. I'm saying it again for the record. It's time. I heard you talking today, Senator Boyce, about all the things that the Ministry of Power, People Empowerment, I'm sorry, I'm not, what name? What? People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. I heard a number, Senator Boyce, Senator Paris, a number of persons said they're doing an excellent job. That is not in dispute. I am not saying that y'all are not saying, but I cannot find anything that is telling me that we are going to be looking at parking for the disabled in the category of the estimates dealing with the disability unit. I don't know if it's somewhere else.
A point of elucidation, Mr. President.
Okay,
While I take the Honorable Senator's point, and I'm happy for her advocacy again this year, I'll take the opportunity to say, having said yesterday, that the policy includes an expansion of the penalty for able-bodied persons or unauthorized persons parking in disabled parking spaces. And that is contained in the policy approved by the Cabinet of Barbados and will definitely be included in the comprehensive piece of legislation that will come to this place soon. Again, I wish to thank the Senator for her impassioned advocacy.
Thank you, Senator. May I answer thanks? Can I say thanks to you, sir? Thank you, Senator Boyce. I hear what you're saying, and we've been hearing about the comprehensive legislation because you and I talked about that last year. So I hear you, and I appreciate what you said, and I don't want to minimize it, but it's time to do something about it, or I'm confused. And I don't know if we need to wait for it to be passed, the comprehensive, because we've already put something in place for it to happen. So what the issue is to work out how to enforce it. Because policemen cannot sit in every car park that has a designated space and look for people who, as I said last year, are worthless and indifferent. I said it last year. I'm saying it again because I can't say worthless because it's worse than that. It is highly offensive. Okay, I've said my piece. Before I go, so how much time I have? I don't even want to hear because if you can tell me my time is done, I want to say 2 more things. 5? 5?
You have 8 minutes.
Oh, what? Sir, yesterday, yeah, was it yesterday? One of my colleagues came in here and talked about legal fees. Seriously? No. What today was? No, that was yesterday. It was yesterday. So this is what I want to say about that. It's real easy for people to talk about lawyers and fees. It's real easy. But you see that same scenario that was presented here, and I'm sorry he's not here. He told me he's going to listen. So good afternoon, Senator Malalou. Let's be clear. Senator Malalou himself said you can be a real estate agent with no qualifications. You go and you pay. I get in there, Speaker. Sorry, sir. Come here, hotted a little bit. Speaker. No responsibility or qualifications. Sometimes what they do, if you're a real estate agent, you get to the house that's locked, you unlock it and go sit on your car while the person who wants to purchase goes and walks through. Nobody tells you anything, nobody points it out. And if you are foolish enough to let a real estate agent point out the landmarks for you, and they're not right, it at you. But let there be a problem with the transaction, prepare. Thank you, Senator Cummings, for the updates. If you have a transaction that must be conducted by lawyers, by law, and one of us make a mistake, we are personally liable for the mistake. Please understand. So you are paying for that. You are paying for us to make sure that your transaction is going to be done properly, that you're not going to buy a property that has encroachments. You're not going to buy a property that the body that's selling it to you don't own it. Please let me get there. Thank you very much. And on that note, they get, I know we're talking, Senator Malalou is talking about 4%. I am still dealing with real estate agents that are charging 5% fee on the purchase price. Work it out. But our minimum scale fee don't get no further than 1% when you really work it out. What you mean, Mr. President? What they mean? Behave? Okay. So, real estate agents really don't add to the process in terms of liability. They have nothing to lose and everything to gain. 4% of doing nothing but being access, 5% having access to the house or the land. We do the work, we do the documents. And let me say, the delay is not always at the lawyers. We have various agencies that we have to deal with. If they are not functioning, we cannot. In any conveyance, you're going to have the land registry, you're going to have BRA, you're going to maybe have the Supreme Court, and don't let it be a family matter, because then you're going to file the order from the family matter, get it back, so you can get a certified copy to put with the conveyance to send it to the land registry, so you're not charged the stamp duty that you're normally going to be charged because it's a family matter. You can get charged $50. And if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have a lawyer, you can't get that. You're paying for that. So offer the lawyers and the fees. We got to get paid. We do work. And minimum fee is a joke compared to what the real estate agents make on these transactions. If you want to talk about the cost, let's have a conversation. But stop disrespecting the attorneys. Stop it. The attorneys are not the only people that have strayed from the straight and narrow. Or for we, Mr. President, what you mean, not you, but you know what I mean, not you, Mr. President. Okay. I have one last thing to talk about, and I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to... Okay, so I have a question. Representatives of seats in the other place have a responsibility to their constituents. That's what they say they're going to do. They get money to pay for their constituency offices. Now, I don't know if it's written anywhere, but as far as I know, and it seems to me that if you have a constituency office, it ought to be in your constituency. You ought not to have to go out of your constituency to see your representative. You agree? I see the politicians nodding. That's one. Let me put it out there. No, Pat nodded. So I understand. So, a few weeks ago, Mr. President, 7 o'clock in the morning, I get a phone call from one of my people. Hysterical. A main has burst. Water is flowing. She became aware of it at 3 o'clock, but it was flowing before, 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was flowing before she became aware of it. I got the call at 7. She's crying because the water has burst across the road from her and is now in at her and in her yard. And the stills, is what you call it, at the back are getting soggy and she feels the house can sink. The props? Go, okay. Today, we will need to give a gold star to Senator Nichols, Mr. President. So, she's panicked. I know a few people. I call the general manager and said, boss, you got a report that they got water, and this wasn't a trickle. Water scarce Barbados had, it was like a torrent of water, that's the word, pelting going down this road. President Kennedy Drive, to be no less. Was I not supposed to say the location? I just did. 9 o'clock, I call back. Anything happen yet? Not yet. But here's the thing. We all know that there is a photographer that, I'm not going to call his name because I didn't tell him I was going to call his name, but what I'm going to say is that more and more we're seeing his work in the press. Do y'all know who I mean? Yes, you do. So he was here for the estimates for the lower house. He heard about it, left, came, took pictures to highlight it for the people in that area because they had called the radio for help. They had called the waterworks, but it was too early. They don't start till 8 or 8:30. It doesn't matter. I got somebody. But he highlighted it. Mr. President, are you listening to me, sir? I called the representative and I let my number show, because I don't always let my number show. And I left a detailed message, please give me a call, there's a situation. And here he is. If I had good legs, I would have gone into the constituency with boots because I would have learned that from the person who was there when he was living, my father. He would have been down there from 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not understanding how you can have a situation like that. And when I ask, why haven't you called your people? We don't know where his office is. We don't know who he is. We don't know how to contact him. When I hear the show, another constituent tell me the office is in the city. But true? That's what we're doing? Now, if I had gone on there and the photographer took my picture, I would hear all kind of talk like coming to carry my way to my seat. I called you. You didn't return my call. Your people were looking for you. I am not satisfied that that's what's supposed to happen. I'm not satisfied. And I think it's important that people understand what their role is as it relates to representing the people of Barbados. Mr. President, I have spoken on the estimates. I have not quarreled with anybody who did the estimates. I quarrel about things, but not with anybody in particular. Y'all nodded, y'all clapped. I am done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator James. Senator Haynes.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. President, and thank you for the grace that you extended to me earlier today. As I prepared for today's debate on healthcare, I ended up down the rabbit hole of Barbados's healthcare history. I read, sir, about the establishment of the old General Hospital for the Sick and Poor in 1844, a decade after emancipation. I read, sir, that it took another 100 years before a women's hospital was established for maternity. I read, sir, about the Moyne Report that exposed the underbelly of deprivation and impoverishment that our foreparents had to live through and the impact that that had on their health. I read, sir, about rampant malnutrition. I read, sir, about an infant mortality rate of 400 deaths out of every 1,000 live births, sir. I read that coming out of the Moyne Report, a guy called Henry Douglas Weatherhead suggested reformation of Barbados's health services. I read about Hugh Gordon Cummins, a premier, a Barbados Labour Party man, who, sir, in 1953, established Barbados's first public health clinic in Speightstown. Sir, I read about the fact that that health center saw 9,000 syphilis cases in its first 9 months. That is the state that we were in. 9,000 cases of syphilis were treated at the Speightstown Public Health Clinic in its first 9 months of operation.
You may want to state the date for the record.
1953, sir. Fascinating history, honestly.
What year was that?
1953.
53. Just want to declare for the record.
I will say, I probably spent a full day's worth of research just on the history of the health sector because it was really mesmerizing work and some of it wasn't so good. I read, sir, that beyond that in 1955, another clinic was set up at Enmore to service residents of the city. That clinic in its first year saw 72,000 patients. Just to express to you the dire state and the dire need that existed, sir, at that time. 1958, Six Roads saw its first public health clinic. Now in 1964, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital was established, and at that time, it was a state-of-the-art facility. 520 beds, for the first time, well, not first time, but state-of-the-art operating theaters. And this November, the QEH celebrates its 60th anniversary. I started with the history because I believe that the time is right for a revolution in healthcare. We can see how in 60 years, we're having chronic issues that you can just open the paper on any given day and admit to. I sit on the board and I'm not going to dismiss any accusation or hide anything. But I'm going to say that the commitment is there, that going forward, we are going to make it better. Issues plaguing us as it relates to the incinerator, long wait times, missing notes. These are perennial issues that were there when I worked there and issues that I have left there, sir. But the commitment is there going forward as we look towards the future, sir. that we will see a revolution in the healthcare system. Coming out of the appropriations debate, we see the investment that is coming, sir, in a major capital expenditure project to the tune of $130 million. I would have alluded to this, sir, during my recent debate on the QEH Amendment Act. Sir, I already spoke towards in a previous debate about the accident and emergency expansion, so I won't dwell on that. But I just wanted to point out that by the time phase 3 of A&E is completed, we would have seen a doubling of the number of treatment rooms that will be accessible to the public. So in a context where someone is waiting to be seen, they end up sitting in a chair, or they were assessed on a trolley and then they're put out in a chair to wait. In doubling the number of treatment rooms, sir, we're hoping that that would alleviate some of the situation, some of the issues related to the experience in accident and emergency so far. But I spoke to A&E extensively in a recent debate, so I won't dwell on that, sir. The capital expenditure project also includes resources towards us getting a new state-of-the-art morgue. There are plans to build a laboratory across the street from the hospital at the Enmore compound. What excites me about the project, sir, was that we are committing to developing the Lions Eye Theaters on the top floor of the Lions Eye Care building once and for all. My mother was Human Resources Director at the hospital back in the day. And it's funny because her office occupied the 3rd floor. The building has been used for a plethora of purposes other than what it was intended to be used for. And we are hoping, sir, with this capital expenditure project, to be able to get 3 eye operating theaters operationalized within the coming year, sir. These operating theaters, sir, will be servicing the needs of patients who need cataract surgery and glaucoma surgery, sir. There are 2 of the major burdens as it pertains to eye disease in Barbados. I can look around this room and tell us all, any of us that reach age 70 will end up with a cataract. It's just a part of the process. As we get older, our lenses harden and become more opaque. And I think that is one of the reasons why our waiting lists are growing. As the population ages, there are certain diseases that come along with aging. Cataracts are one of them. We in the Caribbean also have the highest incidence of glaucoma in the world, a higher incidence than on the African continent, sir. We don't know why, but our glaucoma incidence is incredibly high. All right, so these theaters are going to be servicing the needs of patients with glaucoma, with cataracts, children with childhood eye diseases, sir, patients with retinal detachments, all of these things. Because right now I can tell you, and I will admit to it up front, the Department of Ophthalmology is committed to doing the work. One of the challenges that we're hamstrung by, we have 1 small operating theater and the air conditioner is not even working properly. So they've been having situations, and I will own it, but because I know that we're fixing it. So through incredibly difficult circumstances, they were able to clear a backlog. We're looking towards getting them new microscopes from the leading company that does optical technologies in the world out of this capital expenditure project, sir. So I spoke to the lab, I spoke to the morgue, I spoke to accident emergency briefly. The Lions Eye Care project, sir, you would have already heard me speak towards us getting our first MRI in the public health system. A&E having its own dedicated 128 slice CT, in addition to the 128 slice CT we have upstairs, and these CTs are the only ones of their kind on the island. They are the state-of-the-art CT scans that can do complex scans and give us a lot more detail than we would have had before. And there would have been extensive debate in the public domain about the procurement of a linear accelerator. I just want to touch on this briefly because it matters to cancer patients. We have a situation more recently where we've been able to recruit a new radiation oncologist. Any radiation oncologist that has trained in the last 20 years will tell you that they refuse to use cobalt technologies because of the collateral damage that it can cause to unintended tissues. You want something with a bit more precision, something that's targeted. You don't want a case where you're trying to radiate breast tissue and you end up radiating lung, because then the patient's going to end up with another issue, sir. All of this is patient-centered. So we're making the investment, and you're hearing the number value, but I just want to connect it to the fact that at the end of the day, this is something that's going to improve patient outcomes. This is people-centered policy. The investment is centered around people. So I want to segue to talk about the impact of non-communicable diseases. What we know right now is that roughly $64 million annually of expenditure goes into paying for NCD-related health issues. We also know that there are indirect losses related to NCDs as it pertains to lost workforce participation, lack of productivity, sick days. So the direct expenditure related to managing NCDs is $64 million. It's another $145 million in losses in relation to NCDs, sir. And that is why NCDs are so hot button, is why everybody's talking about it, because we have a problem. We need to get on top of it. Sir, in addition to the efforts being made by civil society organizations like the Heart and Stroke Foundation, Healthy Caribbean Coalition, they're doing lots of work as it pertains to health literacy, helping people to understand about reading labels. More recently, they've had a very active, they were instrumental in the sugar sweetened beverage tax as a deterrent to people drinking sodas and soft drinks, which contribute to NCDs. Sir, more recently, we've heard that the Ministry of Health and Wellness has committed to seeing the elimination of partially hydrogenated oils and trans fats from the Barbadian landscape by December 2025. And that is a mouthful, but I'm gonna break it down for you. Partially hydrogenated oils are basically oils where they're treated through a process of adding hydrogen in order to improve shelf life, in order to improve the flavor and all of this stuff. So basically your shortenings, margarines, all the things that you will find in your cakes and breads and snacks. In 2015, sir, the Food and Drug Administration of the United States indicated that, and I didn't want to get it wrong, so please permit me to read. These partially hydrogenated oils were deemed, quote, generally not safe for human consumption, end quote. That was in 2015. The United States subsequently put something in force where between 2018 and 2021, all manufacturers had to basically phase it out. And something crossed my mind because I am a bit of a snacker in between, I'll admit to it. But I honestly, I'll own it. But just here to say, have you ever seen for export only on a package?
Yes. Chips.
Yes. The chips and the treats that we like, typically this is the culprit. And if it's not good enough for that population, it shouldn't be good enough for ours. That's what I will say. The American Heart Association has shown us through their data that the consumption of partially hydrogenated oils and trans fats results in an increase in your LDL, low density lipoprotein, or bad cholesterol, and a decrease in your good cholesterol, which is high density lipoprotein. So the ratio just goes completely off. What this does is that it increases your risk for heart attack, increases your risk of stroke, and also increases what we call insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, as we would know, is one of the precursors for type 2 diabetes because your tissue doesn't respond to insulin in the same way. So I don't want to get too technical, but it completely throws your metabolic profile off. So this is a policy as we look towards the future We won't see the benefits in our government's tenure, but I'm sure 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we're going to be seeing that overall, hopefully we see a fall in our incidence of heart attack, stroke, heart disease, all of the things, all the NCDs that are currently causing 8 out of every 10 deaths in Barbados. I would have spoken during my recent debate about some of the efforts being made by the Queen Elizabeth Hospital as it pertains to cataract surgeries and joint replacement surgeries. But we're about to embark on a special project as it relates to women's health. 1 in 3 Barbadian women suffer from a condition known as fibroids. Fibroids are what we call benign or non-cancerous tumors of the womb. And the truth is, women deal with things a lot of the time that they don't talk about. They deal with them quietly because there's, usually a bit of stigma involved with talking about some of these things. Fibroids cause excessive bleeding, lead to anemia. What is anemia? Low blood count. So you're fatigued, you can't function, but you're pushing through. You gotta do what you gotta do for the kids and for the household. You see, you still have to show up. So we've decided, sir, to prioritize women's health as we go forward by trying to give the ONG, the gynecological teams at the hospital, the resources that they need and the operating theatre time that they need in order to reduce the wait times for these gynecological cases. And I want to commend the Chief Operations Officer of the hospital for taking the lead on that special initiative. Sir, we would have also heard about an upcoming colorectal cancer project. Barbados has the 8th highest incidence of colorectal cancer globally. A very, very scary statistic. What is the program about? It's all about screening. And what is screening? I'm trying to break down the technical terms for everybody. Screening basically means we're not waiting till you show up with blocked bowel where you can't pass anything, or if you're experiencing bleeding or any of the later stage complications of cancer. What we're saying is, from about X age, based on whatever the recommended guidelines are, we're going to recommend that you come in and have a special test done where we can try to detect the presence of polyps or cancer, right? So all of these, as we look forward, I can see these things really revolutionizing healthcare as we go forward. The estimates of expenditure as it relates to health, sir, I found very, very exciting. I want to segue a bit into the primary care system, having already spoken about the hospital. In order for the QEH to be able to perform as well as we wish it to, we need to make sure that we have a more collaborative and cohesive plan as it pertains to the wider healthcare sector, both private and public. What I was excited to see, sir, was that there are plans in the pipeline to renovate 7 polyclinics and that there will be 2 new polyclinics built, sir. More recently, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has introduced a mobile clinic. So they're actually retrofitted vehicles, sir, with a nurse-led, and I love that we're giving nurses the autonomy to lead because they do it every day. A nurse-led mobile clinic, sir, meeting people where they are in their communities. So the boys on the block, the shut-ins, the postnatal mothers, the kinds of people that can't typically or will not typically seek health services, sir, we're meeting them where they are. They're doing screening, sir, for non-communicable diseases. They're doing pap smear, sir, cervical cancer screening. Sir, they're also doing immunizations. And I'm going to stick a pin on immunizations because even pre-pandemic, we've seen a fall off in the uptake, sir, of immunizations. Basically, vaccine preventable diseases, people aren't taking the vaccines as much. And that was something happening before COVID. I believe COVID accelerated it and exacerbated it, sir. I looked at our immunization statistics, sir, from about a decade ago. And our immunization coverage was over 95%. Sir, by about 2021, we bottomed out at 83%. Now, I want you to consider that a condition like measles, the WHO recommends that nationally in a population, you need to have roughly 95% vaccine coverage in order for even the unimmunized members of the population to have some level of protection. So we've fallen below that threshold. I want to take a moment to remind anyone listening, whether in the chamber or outside of the chamber, conditions like measles cause deadly complications, including encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain. More recently, we would have seen the last man living with an iron lung who had complications from polio that he developed 60 plus years ago, only passed away about 2 weeks ago, an iron lung, because of respiratory failure that he developed because he had polio in childhood. These conditions are not to be played with. But I will say, the data is now showing a gradual uptick. So we bellied out at about 83%. Right now we're just about 87%. And the Ministry of Health and Wellness, led by the Honorable Minister who's seated, is taking the lead, sir, through things like this mobile clinic, meeting people where they are in the community, sir. I will also like to add that the polyclinics across the island during the month of March have had special Saturday clinics, special Saturday child health clinics. You know what the idea was? No excuses. You say you're working Monday to Friday, we open on a Saturday. Bring the children and come. So it's these kind of innovative approaches, doing things differently, that I really, really appreciated, sir, when I read the approach, the Health Ministry's report. Sir, my final point on health, I just wanted to touch briefly on mental health. Okay, I just wanted to touch briefly on mental health, sir. Data is showing that there was a 700% uptick in mental health calls between 2019 and now. 700% increase in mental health calls between 2019 and now in Barbados. Wow. Real talk. I don't have all the, yeah, but sir, I'm so glad to know that the Ministry of Health is taking mental health seriously. The depression, the anxiety, all the things that people are struggling with in the aftermath of the pandemic, sir. They set up a hotline with a short code, and I'm going to share the short code with the audience. I'm going to share the short code with the audience. You can dial 988. 988 is a short code if you're having a mental health crisis or if someone that you know is having a mental health crisis. The operators on that line, sir, they're available 7 days a week. At this point, it's a 12-hour shift, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're looking to expand the hours of operation to full 24-hour coverage, but they're trained in mental health first aid. They can give general information, emotional support, and they also, sir, take what we call hot referrals. meaning that if there's an immediate threat to your life or to someone else's life, they can activate a system, sir, where other entities get involved. So the Ministry of Health, sir, they're also fleshing out a national mental health policy. And at the appropriate time, I look forward to seeing that and speaking on it should it come through this House. Sir, I want to segue to speak with my remaining time about agriculture. My first point would just be a very brief response to my honorable colleague across the floor. During his speech, Senator Maynard made reference to the decimation of the local pork industry, as he framed it, related to issues of an adjustment of duties or import taxes, sir. I just wanted to point out, he didn't attribute blame to any specific minister or administration, but for clarity, I would like to make it clear that it was under the previous Democratic Labour Party administration that the tariff on meat carcasses was reduced, sir, from 184% to 20%, around the time that a certain hotel was being established. All that is happening right now is that people are capitalizing on that lower tax rate. And my understanding is that the Minister of Agriculture and his team are working towards getting that issue rectified. I also wanted to take this opportunity, sir, to highlight that during the 5-year period between 2018 and 2023, as it compares with the 5-year period between 2012 and 2017, sir, that our agricultural outputs of meat production increased by 497,000 kilos. That's on livestock rearing and meat production, sir. In terms of crop production, the Ministry of Agriculture reports that agricultural outputs in crop production, sir, are up 36% compared to where we were in 2018. I'm making these points, sir, because overwhelmingly in the public domain, we will be made to believe that we are not producing more food or that the Ministry of Agriculture is not doing anything, sir. The hard data points to the fact that our livestock and meat outputs are up and our crop production is also up, sir. We're not just boosting production locally, sir, but we're also building out cooperation among our CARICOM neighbors. We know that there are bilateral agreements existing between Barbados and Guyana and between Barbados and Suriname. I took the opportunity, sir, to do some digging on Guyana compared to Barbados. Barbados is 166 square miles, sir. Guyana's land space is 83,000 square miles compared to 166 square miles. Imagine the possibilities as it pertains to local farmers getting access to lands to whether it's crop or livestock rearing. There are opportunities, sir, across the way that I would hope that local farmers will take advantage of. But not only does Guyana have more land, sir, one of the things that has come up in this House repeatedly is the fact that Barbados is a water-scarce country. And although it's been disputed in the past, whether we are water scarce or not in a previous debate, not by myself, but other members, the definition for water scarcity, sir, is having fewer than 1,000 cubic meters of renewable water resources per capita. Barbados stands at 285 cubic meters of renewable water resources per capita. Would you guess where Guyana stands? Guyana has 303,000. We're at 285. Guyana has 303 100,000 cubic meters, sir, of renewable water resources per capita. So not only do they have the land, they have the water supply, sir, that we can build a very healthy, very fruitful, literally, sir, relationship through our bilateral partners and our neighbors to the south. In my last few minutes, sir, and as I wrap up, I would have spoken to a revolution in healthcare. I believe that a revolution in agriculture, sir, is upon us. And this is because, as I read, I saw that the Ministry of Agriculture is looking to build out 50 greenhouses in this coming fiscal year. So I think that former Senator Dr. Brathwaite will be quite proud of me. I went down another rabbit hole as it pertains to greenhouses, aquaponics, hydroponics. I didn't know that there was a difference between the two. Very, very exciting stuff. Right, so 50 greenhouses, sir, to be built across the country. Greenhouses, sir. Think about our current context as it pertains to our climate vulnerability. We know that we saw what happened in Dominica with Hurricane Maria, where the entire agricultural industry was wiped out in a matter of hours. So we know what the risks are. We know if you get too much rain, what happens? If you get too little rain, what also happens, sir? Greenhouses provide a controlled environment. So temperature is regulated, humidity is regulated, water supply is regulated, the nutrient feed going to the plants, everything is regulated. So you get to avoid the shocks that occur in a regular open field crop plant. Because of this, sir, in my reading, crop yields through greenhouse production increase 10 to 12-fold for the relative amount of land that is assigned. So consider our relative amount of land scarcity. Greenhouse production, sir, has the potential to help us to boost our crop yields and to reduce our impact to climate-related shocks as it pertains to farming, sir. I was able to read, sir, about aquaculture. I didn't know there were 10 commercial aquaculture farms and 100 backyard lobbyists who are doing it as well. And what is aquaculture? Basically, you have a closed-loop system where you have fish and plants living harmoniously. So the waste from the fish serves as nutrient food for the plants, and everybody just lives happily ever after. In these closed-loop systems, sir, water usage is reduced by roughly 90%. So there's a significant initial investment that is made, sir. But when you look at what the yields are, what the mitigation against climate-related shocks are, sir, these are investments well made. Further to this, we would have heard about the seed bank and the tissue culture lab and all of these things. And I don't have a green thumb. If you bring a plant to my house, it probably will not make it. But what I loved about this, and once again, it's not an area of expertise for me, so I had to do I called Dr. Brathwaite, I had to do some reading, sir. But these things will allow us, sir, to preserve our genetic material. So I understand there are roughly 20 different varieties of sweet potatoes grown in Barbados. To me, I just know there's one with a yellow skin and one with a purple skin. But roughly 20 different varieties, sir. These things allow us to preserve our genetic material so that in the event that there's a catastrophic event, that we can then readily mobilize as soon as things get stabilized outside. So there's a lot of exciting things, sir, happening both in healthcare and in agriculture, sir. I think that my colleagues on all sides very ably presented their cases, and I've enjoyed being here for the last 3 days. Thank you for recognizing me, and I'm obliged. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Hayes. allows the Deputy President to take the chair for a few minutes.
Senator Cummings, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy President. It has been a long and intense, detailed, and a robust debate over the last 3 days, and I want to begin my wrap-up by recognizing all, without exception, of the honorable senators who have spoken in this debate. Mr. President, we don't come to this lightly. I think certainly I can speak for the government side, and I would not arrogate the right to speak for anyone else. But I will do so on this occasion because I know that no one here takes this responsibility lightly. But when we give up the opportunity to do other things that we could be doing, if you are not a member of the government, if you are a member of the government and you have left your profession and you have come to serve people, then all of those things, Mr. President, represent sacrifice. And I believe that that sacrifice is meant to redound to the benefit of people, the people of Barbados. And that, Mr. President, is why we are all here. And while our jesting and our jostling and our cut and thrust, that's very much par for the course politically, at the end of the day, what we were here for the last 3 days, certainly on behalf of the government of Barbados to do, was to present, to debate solutions that improve the lives of people. In my wrap-up, Mr. President, my role is fairly simple, yet complex, I suppose. It is to cover any of the questions that have been raised from the floor by my honorable colleagues that have not already been answered by those who have spoken on the government side. And so I will use my time to do so starting now, Mr. President. First, the
Senator Cummings, please continue. Thank you, Madam Deputy President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, I was about to go through the responses to the honorable senators who have spoken before, and I was beginning with the honorable member representing the opposition, Senator Watson. Thank you for your contribution, Mr. President. Before I go into the substance of the responses, let me just make it clear that as it relates to matters that are before the Fair Trading Commission, matters that are before the High Court of Barbados, I, as the Minister of Energy, will not use this platform to attempt to intervene in those matters, this or any other platform. I am certain that since I have taken this role, you have not heard me on any occasion attempt to weigh in to those matters because this is not the place for me to so do, and it is not the role of the minister who, under the legislation, does not have such powers assigned to them. And so, Mr. President, I will not be responding to any matters which are either before the High Court or before the FTC. It is not appropriate to do so. So, Mr. President, I will, however, speak on the broader policy issues which occupy the government's attention. I'm going to go through them fairly systematically from all of the other honorable members who have spoken. Mr. President, first and foremost, the honorable member representing the opposition Democratic Labour Party and other honorable senators raised the question of the deficit. How is this government proposing to close the deficit? There was a question as to whether or not we were going to be introducing new taxes. There is a question, Mr. President, that was raised on what was going to happen with personal taxes, what was going to be happening with other kinds of taxes, whether there would be some adjustment in corporation taxes. Mr. President, I will respond to that in this way. There are 3 measures by which a government can use to close the deficit. They can borrow, Government has indicated from foreign debt servicing. They have indicated from local debt financing. But there's also one measure that we have not mentioned, Mr. President. If you were to go through the government's estimates of expenditure year on year on year on year, you will always see that there is an adjustment that comes in at the end of every single financial year. The government makes determinations if they have raised enough from revenue to meet their expenditure needs, and if not, there is a curbing of expenditure in order to ensure that the deficit is met. This is a well-established practice by the government, and I believe that historically and even in the current financial year, you will see and have seen that this government has come back to this Parliament every year to attempt to ensure that there is a reconciliation between our revenue and our expenditure, estimated versus actuals. Captured also in our estimates of expenditure in the purple book, as Senator Kevin Boyce likes to call it, he referred to it as that earlier. You will also see the estimated expenditure, and you will see the actual expenditure, Mr. President. And so I would not want there to be any misrepresentation in the public space that the only measures by which a government or this government can close the deficit or ensure that you reduce spending in order to match that which you raise in revenue is by increasing taxes. Now, on the question of corporation tax, in November last year, the Prime Minister gave a ministerial statement. The Prime Minister gave a ministerial statement in which she spoke about the globe rules of the OECD. She spoke at that time about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, what needed to be done. She spoke about Barbados moving from a low tax or a nominal tax jurisdiction. She spoke at the time about the 9% corporation tax rate, and then what was now being proposed effective January 2025 to be able to ensure that Barbados, under the Pillar 2 requirements, and I say this because, Mr. President, the ministry with responsibility for business, my ministry, the International Business Unit, the Barbados Revenue Authority, the ministry with responsibility for finance, the minister with responsibility for finance, and I have already credited our consulting team led by the former head of the tax of the OECD, Mr. Pascal Saint-Amand, who has spoken on these matters here in Barbados and has engaged with the sector, whether it has been at the level of the Barbados International Business Association, Barbados Bankers Association, and all of the entities that fit the threshold. And what is the threshold? There was a comment made, Mr. President, over the course of the last day, I think it was yesterday. Will there be a pass-through from the amendments to the corporation tax regime to domestic consumers? Mr. President, the majority of the companies that fit within the threshold and fall within scope, $750 million annually per year, are not those which are domestic companies that have any relationship with the consumer in the same way. The threshold is extremely high, and therefore, Mr. President, there is no correlation between what is being done there at that level and what is being done for the consumer. The two things are very separate, Mr. President. But what I will say is this. You also heard earlier today about the question of small businesses and what was being done with regard to small businesses. Mr. President, you heard in the Prime Minister's statement a change in the regime that would have allowed small businesses as well to be captured at 5.5%. That was also covered in the ministerial statement so that it is lower, and you would have seen, Mr. President, that that was implemented, and we continue to have the reference being made to the changes in the corporation tax, both in November in the ministerial statement and last week in the other place in the budgetary statement, Mr. President. Now, the adjustment we spoke about earlier, there is a global move afoot. Some countries have already moved. I believe Senator Chantal Monroe Knight said, we live in a world by ourselves. We don't make the rules on our own, Mr. President. And so some countries have already indicated what they intend to do. The UAE has already indicated what they intend to do. There are some countries in Southeast Asia that have indicated what they intend to do. In this region, where the majority of our business comes from out of Canada, they have not yet indicated what they intend to do. And so the Prime Minister, in her wisdom, has been very clear to indicate that subject to the decisions being made by countries where a lot of this business originated in the first place, subject to their decisions being made on what they're going to do under the requirements for Pillar 2, that we will have to make determinations domestically on what happens externally. And at that time, in the same way that she was very upfront in November, in the same way that she was very upfront ever since then, and in the same way that she was upfront last week, this government will continue to be upfront with the people of Barbados, and in particular, with the sectors that are affected. I give the assurance, Mr. President, that the Prime Minister has met with and spoken with the committee, with the communities that will be affected, or rather I should say the businesses that are affected that fall within scope. She has met with them in the UK, she's met with them in Canada, she's met with the major entities that fall within scope. If you have not been met with, chances are you are not within the scope of the new corporation tax regime. Now, Table 8 was raised by a few senators in terms of needing additional information. Mr. President, when the estimates are prepared, you may have all of the information on projected plans. I'm going to speak specifically to two of them, which fall under my ministry, which would say there is no of the information available. NPC expansion, Mr. President. The National Petroleum Corporation, as we know, has a gas pipeline mains that are over there. Our gas pipelines are over 60 years old. They are as old as the Barbados Water Authority mains in the country. And we have heard the Prime Minister speaking on more than one occasion about how we have needed to repair the post-colonial infrastructure for water in order to make sure we address some of the issues, including non-revenue water. In the case of natural gas, it is the same thing, Mr. President. These are also pipelines that have been laid in the same era, and therefore replacing them and reinstating the pipelines is a priority for this government. As I speak, that national expansion is being costed. And at this point, that is the reason why you do not yet have a number in the table which outlines what is to be done on the NPC expansion. Needham's Point, Mr. President, the Needham's Point, which was the old mobile site, I can't tell you how long that matter was outstanding. That was outstanding for as long as any of us have been around. It's been a long overdue matter for cleanup. And I am proud to say that we can see on Bonfire, which is the government's procurement platform, that we have just issued a terms of reference inviting persons to do first a characterization study of the Needham's area and two, a cleanup of the characterization of the mobile area. It is on that basis, Mr. President, that you do not have a costing in the document that is before you, but it is projected capital works, and the proposal is that once those things are done, there will be a further updating. Mr. President, I don't know if I need to go into things relating to not helping the elderly. I believe that Senator Patricia Paris spoke at great length about that, but I do want to treat to the issue of external consultants versus junior experts. Mr. President, this is where I'm going to get political. This is where I'm going to get political. I am proud to be a member of a Barbados Labour Party that has practiced for as long as I have known it, something called and widely ridiculed the politics of inclusion. Politics of inclusion. This Barbados Labour Party is not the other side that brings people only for the purpose of their alignment with a political party. This political party that I belong to has hired persons on the basis of their skills, their competencies, their exposure, their experience, and their ability to deliver. The fact that they wear the colors of the Democratic Labour Party and will tribalistically follow Democratic Labour Party dogma is not the Barbados Labour Party way. This Labour Party, for consultants, for experts, even for board members, is not the party, Mr. President, that Senator King could speak of, that he could get work, because the other and his dog left him, the last to leave him, because it was a Democratic Labour Party government. There are persons who sit in this chamber who could tell you that when the government changed, they could not get work because they were a Barbados Labour Party member and it was a Democratic Labour Party in power. There are artists, even as we talk about the orange economy and the creative economy and what we want to do for artists, Mr. President, there are artists in this country who would say today that they could not get work because when they went to go to agencies like Invest Barbados and others on trade missions, they would be told, who's your manager? And from the time they are told who their manager is, they cannot get on a trade mission. It is a fact. In this country, we don't live so. If you look among those who we have hired as consultants, junior, senior, in between, any other kind of consultant or board member, any kind of professional, they come from all different kinds of political persuasions. We don't care. As long as you are a Barbadian, this government has hired you. Under the Prime Minister who we have now, under the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable, the late excellent Owen Arthur, we had the politics of inclusion. And let me make it clear here, Mr. President, no political party that its leadership has so demonstrated a tribalism in a small country like Barbados, where only people who support the Democratic Labour Party are hired under the Democratic Labour Party can walk about and talk about people in this country, Mr. President. Not one. Nobody. They have no credibility, Mr. President. Their record speaks for itself. Don't mind their words. No, their words are empty and they are hollow, Mr. President. There are people who are reluctant to serve in government because they don't want to be perceived to be aligned with a given political party. There are people who don't want to work in government because of the tribalism that has been practiced in the main by the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. President. There are people who refuse to apply for jobs because if they get the job under this government, they are guaranteed that the minute that the Dems get in office, they will get fired. And that is the practice and the history long overdue of the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. President. So I have no time for those who talk about junior consultants, senior consultants, overseas consultants. We have a history and a proud one at that. I am unbothered by the asides because they who speak do not speak for me, Mr. President. I will speak and I will claim my time. They can speak to those who want to be able to believe the hype. But we know the reality, Mr. President, and when this Barbados Labour Party walks the length and the breadth of this country and hears from people, they don't only talk to some, they talk to all, Mr. President. So let us be clear. We have prioritized as a government and as a party, historically and currently, skills, capacity, and the Prime Minister always says to us, what is fit for purpose is what I care about. Many times we go and we have board appointments to make. Senator Walker, Senator Monroe Knight, we have all experienced it, and now Senator Blackman, where the only consideration that the Prime Minister wants to hear is, are they fit for purpose? There are some agencies in this country, Mr. President, and the Prime Minister will tell you straight, this is a technical role. Whoever fits, I want them. It doesn't matter. That's not the Democratic Labour Party way, though. That's the Barbados Labour Party way. And as long as we are the government, long may it be so. Long may it be so. Barbados is too small for that level of tribalism, Mr. President. But I will pause there and I will move on. On the education sector, Mr. President, a lot has been said. There are a couple of things, however, that I want to go into for the record, because I don't deal in alternative facts. I could deal in facts that can be carried in mainstream media and not only on YouTube channels. Mr. President, on the education sector, in many instances, we have had the accusation leveled, and fairly so, that there have been any number of challenges with school plans every year when schools are opening. That is a reality. I have before me, Mr. President, the record from 2008 to 2024-2025 of how much was spent on school maintenance from the nursery, from primary, and to secondary, Mr. President. Let they who want to speak not speak from the hip. Let them not speak from the hip, Mr. President. No. In 2008, Mr. President, in the approved estimates, because it's the estimates debate, we had $2,234,000 approved. It was revised upwards to $3.8 million. By 2018, Mr. President, that number was at $3.6 million. Mr. President, this government, Mr. President, that would wish us to believe that the Minister of Education should resign, this government that would have us to believe that the Ministry of Education is not maintaining school plans, between 2010 and 2014, 2015, every year, $2.5 million, $2.6 million, and $3.1 million, and then $2.4 million respectively in those years that I have just referred to. From 2018, Mr. President, this government spent $4.9 million in maintenance of nursery and primary. In 2019, $5.03 million. In 2021, Mr. President, $8.47 million. In 2023, $4.513 million. And in 2023-24, $4.45 million. This Barbados Labour Party has spent more on school maintenance than the government that came before it that would wish now to speak about school maintenance, Mr. President. But I don't want to stop there. I want to go into also, Mr. President, the secondary schools. The secondary schools also have data, Mr. President. The secondary school has data. And equally, Mr. President.
Honourable members, the senator is next to me and I can't hear her. Let me hear the honourable senator who's wrapping up, please.
Mr. President, in 2012, which is the earliest year for which I have data available, Mr. President, my side, $2.1 million. $2.1 million. In 2013, $2.4 million, Mr. President. Come to 2018, 2019, $4.2 million, and almost a doubling. Then when we had 2019, 2020, $4.3 million, Mr. President, and the numbers continue to rise. These monies, for clarification, and the question was asked earlier by our colleague, Senator Nurse, specifically about whether or not they are assigned to the schools.
Honourable senators, please. I'm trying to hear Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, but I'm okay. Mr. President, those who want to hear will hear.
Senator Nurse.
Senator Nurse, in this instance, is who I'm speaking to. He has the grace that I'm so used to in this honorable chamber. Mr. President, no. Mr. President, the monies that I just referred to are allocated to the schools, boards, which is the question which you asked, the boards of management of each of the schools, they have the monies allocated to them and they take direct responsibility. It is voted for as a block. You will see it in these estimates by the Ministry of Education and then referred to the schools, boards of management who then take responsibility for managing the maintenance. So this is secondary schools. It is managed centrally for nursery and primary schools, however. And so I just wanted to be in a position to answer that question for you, Senator Nurse, in terms of how it was provided. But I let the record show, Mr. President, that the maintenance of school plants has seen greater funds allocated to it because the plants were neglected for so long, Mr. President. When in the tourism sector, 2020 and 2021, the hotel plants were shut down, or were meant to be shut down. This is the reason why we introduced the BEST program, Mr. President, to avoid having to close and not maintain properties as a result of a shutdown. Because when you leave something unmaintained for a long time, then the maintenance costs are higher. This is the reason, Mr. President, why we are seeing increased costs being allocated in these estimates of expenditure for maintenance. I believe also, Mr. President, for the record, that last year, you saw at the end of the financial year, there was an adjustment, and the Prime Minister did come back to the other place to give a further adjustment of an additional $11 million to be assigned to renovate 7 schools at the time, and that was just debated in the other place. Now, Mr. President, on the broader question of education reform, should the government give more time? Who are the real stakeholders? I believe that Senator Reverend Morris spoke to some extent about many of these things, and I want to just cover a few things. Mr. President, the government of Barbados was very clear, and I stand here as a member of a cabinet that was told very early up, this is not about us. All of us have children, nieces, cousins, nephews, friends, children who have gone through the system. I have a daughter who has gone through the system. And in fact, she's 24 years old now. I still vividly remember what it was like to have her in secondary school in Barbados. And I had a perspective on the basis of what my experience in a secondary school was as a parent. But the Prime Minister of this country was very clear. This is not our decision to make. Let the stakeholders give their feedback up front. Engage with them, hear what they have to say. And so I can wholeheartedly endorse from a first-hand perspective what Senator Reverend Morris has said about initially engaging first without anything being scripted or imposed on the sector as it relates to education sector reform. We are now, I believe, a year plus into those consultations, town halls, engagements with the labor unions, all of the parties, meetings at the gymnasium with the NCPTA, all of those parties have been engaged so far, and it is the judgment of the Honourable Prime Minister and the government of Barbados that the value of the inputs that have come in from the country, not from anybody individually, but from the country in all of the stakeholders, is so significant that the government would wish to make sure that it does it justice. And it would wish to ensure that something that is so important is done fully, it is done comprehensively, and it is done in a way that does justice to the people who have taken their time and have given their feedback. Mr. President, this is not the first time we have had an opportunity to do education sector reform, you know. This is not the first proposal on education sector reform. No government has had, one of my colleagues call it the intestinal fortitude, some may call it the testicular fortitude, whatever kind of fortitude it is, no government has had the guts to tackle the important issue of education sector reform in this country in a comprehensive manner. Senator Reverend Rogers spoke about the Common Entrance exam. This is only about the Common Entrance exam, and he has acknowledged that in his contribution. It is a part of it, but it is not the entire thing. Senator Reverend Rogers raised the question of curriculum reform, curricular reform. That is a part of it. How do people learn? How do people learn differently? What streams can we put people into on the basis? Because I am one of those people who don't believe, Mr. President, and I've never been apologetic about it, that more time and holding you until later means that second-class education is your choice. I've never been that person who believes that. I have always been that person who has made it very clear, I am in the academic stream. This system, as it is currently structured, favors me. It favors me. But I stand here conscious of what we call privilege. And I say, because it favors me does not mean that I can use my position in policy making to keep it in a way that disadvantages the majority, which it does, Mr. President, which it does. I have stood in this place, Mr. President, and I have said on more than one occasion, I grew up as a student of the St. Michael's School with my mother working in the St. George Secondary School. I lived the two things side by side. And I saw the things that I was not capable of doing with students who were excelling at it in St. George Secondary School, while I may have excelled academically at the St. Michael's School. What makes me better? What puts me on a pathway that is more elevated or more verified and more recognized, that, as Senator Reverend Rogers would say, you butt yourself and your parents. Congratulations, congratulations on what? And if you shame to say where your child has gone to school, you edge him back from the congratulations, Mr. President. Education reform is a must in this country. Comprehensive education sector reform is a must, Mr. President. The elitists among us who want to maintain the status quo because it has favored them, and they want to be able to send their children to the schools that they went to so that they can stand on a pulpit and say, on a platform and say, my child is at Hartson College, my child went to Queens. No, Mr. President, that's not the Barbados of 2025. There are too many young men walking this country feeling like second-class citizens in their own country. Too many young women sitting in this country, walking the streets of this country, right, some of them outside of this Parliament building, who don't feel as though they ever had a chance from age 11. So education sector reform is a must. Delaying it for an additional year is a must to make sure we get it right, and doing it holistically and comprehensively is also a must. And all of those things this country is committed to. Mr. President, there were some questions raised about business, Barbados, and KIPO, and I want to try and deal with them all together. Mr. President, when we first came to office in 2018, there was a discussion around what state-owned enterprises were there, what needed to be changed, what we would keep, what was a must-have, what was a priority. Mr. President, I speak from experience with the public service. Senator Tate just spoke about lawyers and the legal system. Mr. President, in KIPO today, as it stands, a part of central government, a department within central government, an officer who has been trained and who has gone off to OECD and FHTB and who has built all the skills and the capacity to be able to deal with the corporation, the corporate registry, an officer who has dealt with WIPO and has gone off and had the training in intellectual property, could tomorrow be transferred to the Ministry of Transport and Works. And with it, the skills and the capacity that have been vested in them are lost to the agency, Mr. President. And then the clients who come to the desk and to the cashiers at KIPO find themselves dealing with persons who are transferred from licensing authority, who have to learn on the job, and who in many instances need to have the benefit of time to be able to adjust to a new environment and learn what is being done. And each time, Mr. President, you train, you retrain, you upskill, you retool, you develop capacity internal to these agencies, as long as they sit within the departments of central government, you are prone to losing talent and skills that are meant to deliver the kind of facilitation that Senator Malalou referred to as part of the raison d'etre of business. They don't function in the way that they don't, not because they don't want to, Mr. President. I cannot tell you the frustration sometimes, and I hear the colleagues around this table speaking about the frustrations dealing with KIPO. I hear it, I understand it. But I'm here to also say to you that my officers in KIPO, and I claim them today, Mr. President, because they are just as frustrated as we are. They are frustrated because they are on the front line of every frustration of the entire business community every single day, and they feel it just the way we do. They want to have the tools to do better. They want to have the manpower to do better. Somebody goes off on sick leave, they're off for 2 weeks, not long enough under the central government rules to be able to bring in a replacement. Nobody goes in to help them. They are short-staffed. Somebody is sent from central government to pick up a new responsibility. They get called off on jury duty. Central government rules do not allow for persons to be replaced when they're on jury duty. And the basic exigencies of the public service. Senator Monroe Knight would know how many times I sent her SOS messages, help, help, help with appointments, Mr. President, because the business community doesn't care about any of that, and I'm not asking them to. But the people who are serving and providing facilitation, they care about it, Mr. President, because they want to do better. They want to be world-class. They want to deliver top-class service. They don't want their ministers sending every complaint to them every other day. They don't want it either. And so I commend them for working under very difficult circumstances, but it is for that reason and many others that you will see the new commercial state-owned enterprise that is KIPO created separate and apart from central government, in a position to recruit and hire skills that are needed for that purpose, to transition the staff that is there and to provide them with the kind of security that they need, that they can do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to give them all of the support that they need to transition. All of those are the things that you can expect to see. I have spoken in my initial presentation about what the agency is meant to do. I'm speaking in this incarnation now about why it is being constituted in this way, because I'm responding to the question that has been asked, Mr. President. Now, as I move on, trying to be very quickly, but trying to do so very quickly. Now, on the question of the data center and its establishment, it will consume a ton of electricity. This is entirely true, Mr. President. We know this. We know this because the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology and the government overall have established that that is very much a fact. In fact, the electricity consumption, electricity demand by this government has been modeled and simulated on the basis of future growth overall. We as a government can tell you that we have assessed all of the public sector investment projects, the PSIP, all the private sector investment projects, all of the residential projects that are meant to unfold, and the inclusion of the data center, yes, for the purpose of assessing what the future demand will be for services, whether they be electricity services, water, natural gas, all of those things have been simulated, Mr. President. And so we are planning, as I said in my opening, and as I believe that some of my colleagues mentioned as well, for today, and we're planning for tomorrow. I've spoken about the deficit, Mr. President, and I want to come to cost of living in this moment, Mr. President, in my remaining time in particular, in response to my honorable colleague, Senator Walters. Senator Walters spoke about the cost of living and what measures the government was taking to be able to reduce the cost of living. Mr. President, my ministry is responsible for creating and monitoring prices, I should say. On a monthly basis, we produce what we call a report on the basic basket of goods that constituted the compact. The compact was introduced in July of 2022, and it ended last year when the private sector indicated that they were not coming back in, late last year. Mr. President, there are 47 commodities that are in this basket of goods. Now, Mr. President, I believe one of my colleagues in this honorable chamber talked about champagne taste and Warby pockets. I want to say, yes, one of our honorable, and it wasn't on this side either, one of our honorable colleagues talked about it. And I want to say here, Mr. President, that the 47 items in the basket of goods that we monitor are those things that Barbadians use all the time. They're the things that are part of our day-to-day existence: rice, peas, those kinds of things, meats, in particular chicken and so on. Sardines, yes, high protein, eggs, cornflakes, and so on, toilet tissue. Our assessment, Mr. President, has been that despite the end of the compact period, prices have continued to hover at or around the compact pricing. This is notwithstanding the fact, Mr. President, and we're not pulling from our hips either. Mr. President, this is notwithstanding the fact that we did an assessment, because I like numbers. I want to understand the data. I want to understand what I'm actually dealing with. So while the prices compact initially, before I joined the ministry, focused on the markups of prices, Mr. President, I wanted to go behind there. And I started the process of looking at the analysis of first costs. I called in myself with my team, the distributors and the wholesalers and the importers, to get a sense of what your first costs were. We did an analysis with the Bridgetown Port and others of the logistics and the shipping costs by route and by market. We then looked at the landed costs, Mr. President. We then looked at what the port charges were, and then we looked at what the retail prices were, and then the markups. So we did a full analysis of the entire supply chain in order to make an assessment. And despite the increases that we saw globally in some instances, what we saw was that in some cases, the prices either held constant, or in other instances, the prices increased slightly. But that is not to say, Mr. President, and I'm not going to minimize it here, my colleagues have not done so. This is not to minimize the fact that people on the ground will feel costs in a way that will be real to all of us. I don't shop on Mars. I just go to the supermarket like everybody else. I don't shop overseas. I actually don't do online shopping, for Joe. I don't. Whatever I want, I buy here, or if I travel, I do. I don't buy online shopping, Senator Maynard. I don't. I love picky. I want to feel things in my hand and touch them. But the reality of it, Mr. President, is that we took the time to do the assessment. The port fees, we had control over, we intervened. The assessment of duties on the freight rates, we had control over, we intervened. The measure of capping markups, the private sector worked with us, they have held prices. We have, however, no control over the first cost, the shipping cost, or anything that is external. And it is disingenuous for any political party to come to the people of Barbados and to attempt to mislead them into thinking that a government, any government, if the Democratic Labour Party was sitting in this chair, they would have no opportunity to have a control, any control over shipping rates. They must not give the public the impression that they do. They do not have the ability to give any relief on first cost pricing. They must not give the public the impression that they do. In order to score political points or to get people's sympathy, or as the Deputy President spoke about, political discontent, you must not give people the impression, especially people who are struggling as you have described them and as we experience them, hope that you can do something that we know you can't do. And so the reality is, Mr. President, even as we have looked at the prices, we acknowledge that where there is a measure within the government's control to reduce the cost of living, this Barbados Labour Party has already demonstrated a willingness to do so, and it will continue to so do, Mr. President. There are only two further things that were raised, Mr. President, that I want to respond to. Senator Drakes raised a question, and I was a little confused, Mr. President, because when I joined the Senate in 2020, she was in the Senate at the time. So there would be anyone other than perhaps Senator Drakes and a few others on the other side who would have heard on more than one occasion the articulation of what this government's development strategy is, whether it is as it was described by Madam Deputy President and the planks and pillars on which it is based. So I was a little surprised to find the Honourable Senator a little entangled in her own narrative, where they seem to be unclear about what our development strategy was. But I'm grateful for the Honourable Deputy President, who I hope has spoken about our sustainability, our inclusivity, our mechanisms for engaging citizens in decision-making. And we have seen those, I think we have talked about them perhaps ad infinitum in this honourable chamber, where we talked about people's assemblies from the Thorne Commission as well. We talked about Parish Speaks. We have seen Parish Speaks. We haven't even talked about Parish Speaks. We have done Parish Speaks, and everybody has seen them. And they're not those occasions where people are coming and they're coming from a political branch. The average person has been able to walk in and have the benefit, not just in the well of Parliament from officials who are the technical officials dealing with the issues, but they're walking and engaged them one-on-one in Parish Speaks, Mr. President, from MTW to Water Authority, and you see people walking through the communities. What are your challenges? That's people-centered leadership, Mr. President. That's the kind of people-centered leadership that this government talks about and walks about to do, Mr. President. We have lived it. We have lived it, Mr. President. Now, I believe that the Honourable Deputy President also spoke about housing and the structure that was raised by Senator Nurse on whether or not the national housing was going to be phased out. I believe that the Honourable Deputy President has answered that. I want, however, to answer the question raised by the colleague on the sugar industry. And I want to draw to your attention, Mr. President, that in the agriculture sector, the sugar industry, as we know, has now transitioned into a new arrangement, and there are the two new companies that we have seen. There is a strategic plan. The Ministry of Energy has been working closely with the various partners. There is a solar component, yes, and there is a biomass component. And the question at this stage is well, there are multiple questions that are being navigated at this time, Mr. President. The crop has started, as we have seen, that has been happening. And what the expectation is that the increasing yields from sugar, not necessarily additional acreage, but increasing the yield in sugar production will lead to an increase in energy production. We're going to be seeing the biomass, and we're going to be also seeing the solar PV, but I will leave those private entities to be in a position in their own time to speak about what they are doing. You did ask about whether the government could use a PPP approach to building houses that is similar to Wanstead and Oxnard. That, Mr. President, is what we have seen in some developments across the country where we have seen the land being provided by the government and private operators coming in and being given the opportunity to build 200 to 300 houses in those communities where persons can take a mortgage and be in a position to put them on the market for sale to persons. Now, you also raised, Senator Nurse, Mr. President, through you, the question of the stadium. I believe that has been responded to by Senator John King. But just to reiterate, the stadium has been in this state for 16 years. 6 years of this administration and 10 years before. This government has made a commitment, and you don't see it in this estimates as yet, largely because the Prime Minister has announced, the Minister of Sport has also announced that a grant from the government and people of China will be the basis on which the new stadium is developed. They have advised, I believe I heard the Honourable Minister of Sport in the other place speak about it being at the stage now where permissions are being given. He has spoken about the additional tracks that are being developed, 400-metre tracks, warm-up tracks, and they have given the indication that there will also be work commencing very shortly on the adjacent netball stadium. And that facility is going to be expanded to move beyond just netball, but for volleyball and badminton as well. You have heard the Honourable Minister in the other place also speak about, and it is not a replacement, I want to be clear, the mini stadia around the country in different places is not a replacement for the national stadium. The two are very different. And so the national stadium is there for the purpose that we know a national stadium exists for, but mini stadia are there for people to be able to go into their communities. When I drive home sometimes, Mr. President, and I pass across Flash Valley, I like to be able to see when I get coming up Mac Hill and the lights are on. And the lights are on and I know immediately cars parked, there's football on the field. And the idea of being able to replicate that, when I get in the Glebe, just in front of Reverend Rogers' church, and I see the lights there, the new pavilion that is right there that has just been opened under this government, I like to be able to see people out there playing netball and the guys on the field playing football. When I pass on my old school, St. George Primary School, on the field, and the kids doing preparation for sports, the St. George Primary Lions, I like to be able to see that, Mr. President. That is what the mini stadia are meant to support, to be able to support. I'm a St. Michael's girl, yes, but my primary school is St. George Primary, so I have to support the St. George Lions. So you have that happening all across the country, Mr. President, and you want to be able to give people the opportunity at a grassroots level to support their communities and to come out and get involved in activities. I am always happy to see it, and that is a commitment of this government, Mr. President. As I get ready to close up on the queries that I think I have attempted to respond to that were raised by the colleagues, Mr. President, I was a little confused by one of the proposals, one of the queries that was raised as a concern on government's proposals. Are we making sure that those who get the benefits from government should have the opportunity to return those benefits? That was one of the things that was raised by one of the colleagues. I believe it was Senator Kevin Boyce. He's not with us in the moment, but I hope he is in a position to hear. But Mr. President, that is the definition of things relating to things like the Give Back program at the University of West Indies, SJPI, BCC. It is the basis of a controversial, otherwise called piece of legislation, otherwise called the Labour Concessions Act. In order to be able to benefit from concessions from the government, and when I say benefit from concessions to government, it means that government is determining that it will forego revenue in a concessionary arrangement in order for you to be an investor in a given area, and if you are getting the benefit of foregone revenue, you have to give back, and you have to engage in labor practices that are fit for this country, that respect workers. It is these kinds of things. And finally, Mr. President, on that particular point, we have always, as a country, been talking about the level of foregone revenue and the concessions. We want concessions, Mr. President, but the same social services that we want to expand are paid for by government revenues, Mr. President, and that is what the balance must be at all times. Mr. President, we have one of our opposition colleagues who spoke earlier today. They have not yet collided with the estimates of expenditure, but I want to, however, respond to a couple of queries raised by them. Mr. President, very quickly in my remaining minutes. Senator Maynard spoke about agriculture in the main. I believe that Senator Crystal Haynes, Dr. Crystal Haynes responded. Regrettably, Senator Tate, I am not in a position to respond at this time to your legal questions, but I think you knew that, you expected that. But as is always the case, we commit to providing any answers that we can get from the relevant authorities. Mr. President, I believe that I have covered all of the things that have been raised by the honorable colleagues here over the course of these estimates. But in closing, I wish only to say, Mr. President, that what is represented in these estimates of expenditure represent this year's installation of this government, this Barbados Labour Party government, in the development of our people. It focuses, Mr. President, on the high level, the macro policy. It focuses on our external environment. It focuses on our domestic environment. And I believe, Mr. President, that it was the founder of the Democratic Labour Party who coined the term that foreign and domestic policy are the obtuse and the reverse sides of the same coin. The party that its founder coined that phrase, Mr. President, cannot then be the party that argues against international engagement, attendance at international meetings, engagement in international fora, having a voice and representation in international meetings, because foreign policy is the reverse side of domestic policy. In my own sector, we don't produce any of the technology for renewable energy. It is almost always imported. If we are not sitting at the table where decisions are being made, Mr. President, we are at a disadvantage. And I do not wish to have Barbadians be misled into thinking that a prime minister, on the one hand, because she is traveling to attend to the foreign policy and the domestic considerations on one side, two sides of the same coin of our country and of our people, that she does not have the benefit of the honorable senators sitting in this chamber from right here where I stand all the way here, the members of the cabinet, the members who sit in the other place, representing at a sectoral and a ministry level and at a constituency level, notwithstanding the points made earlier by some of the other colleagues of returned phone calls, which I'm sure there's a very good reason for. But, Mr. President, the purpose of all of the persons who are sitting here and in the other place and in cabinet is to ensure that people's needs are met, that Barbados' development trajectory is on a firm foundation, and that the needs of tomorrow are being built on a scaffolding of which we can be proud. This Barbados Labour Party, Mr. President, can be proud that in 5 years, in 10 years, anyone speaking about our legacy can see the institutional scaffolding which we laid. We are not the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. President, that would wish to distance itself from their own institutional scaffolding in their last government. We are proud to stand on our institutional scaffolding, Mr. President, proud to stand on the development trajectory that we are building, and proud to present these estimates and to commend this appropriation bill to this honourable chamber. And I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Honorable senators, this appropriations bill has been certified as a money bill. Such to be no committee stage. Senator Cummings, would you please move the third reading?
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, this is something that I think many of us have looked forward to in the last 3 days. This being the end of government's business.
No, you have to move that to pass.
I beg to move that this bill now be passed, Mr. President, and be so cited.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Appropriation Act 2024. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I was myself too eager, but I want to, in bringing this debate to a close and declaring that this is the end of government business for this estimates debate, I want to thank all of the honorable senators in this chamber, government side, independent side, opposition side. I want to thank you for contributing to this debate. I want to thank the staff of Parliament who have been here on this occasion every day before us, after us, supporting this debate, and I want to recognize them, those who are in the chamber and those who are outside of the chamber for their hard work. Mr. President, there are those who are visible and those who are not, and there are a number of people who support the work of this chamber. The entire Parliament team, not just the Parliament staff, whether they are the caterers downstairs, the guards downstairs, the police officers who are here supporting us, the marshals, the officers from the Cabinet Office who have been here with us for the last 3 days, all of the administrative team members, and I want to also thank the IT persons who have allowed this debate to be streamed live on Parliament TV. I want to recognize them. This is no small task. Oftentimes, Mr. President, we are here, we're running back and forth, we're going either to get something quickly, to snack on, to come back in because we don't want to be away from the debates. And so what we take for granted sometimes are those things that we can't see, Mr. President, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to recognize them. We have custodians who make sure that they keep the facilities clean. We come in here every day, we find the facilities not just clean, but smelling fresh and replacing all of the things that we're using during the course of the day. I want, Mr. President, for us to join ourselves, to join me in celebrating the work that is being done on behalf of the people of Barbados. Finally, Mr. President, I want to also acknowledge that over the course of the past 3 days, we also had members of the Youth Parliament who stayed with us. They stayed from morning, most days, till night, and they were very enthralled by the cut and thrust of the debate and the jesting among the honourable senators, and I want to recognise them. They are the future of this honourable Parliament, and I commend them for their commitment to service from such an early age. It is now Wednesday, March 27th. Tomorrow, for those who are of a certain religious denomination, it is Holy Thursday. Two of us in this room, two persons in this room are reverends, and I know that they have a busy weekend up ahead. For those of us who are Christian, some aspiring reverends, I'm told, are in the end of the road. For those of us who are Christian, this is perhaps the biggest Christian holiday, even bigger than Christmas, certainly it is. absolutely the biggest Christian holiday of the year, and I am looking forward, as I know that my colleague, Senator Chantal Monroe Knight, we are looking forward to church on Easter Sunday. That is where you will find me with my family, and those who will be at Good Friday service, and so on, Mr. President. But I want to take the opportunity, as I close now, to wish the Honorable Chamber happy Easter to all of you, and God's richest blessings for the season up ahead. I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned sine die.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Before I put the question, let me just associate myself with the expression of thanks to the staff of the chamber. In addition to the 3 days that they have spent with us, they have spent 3 weeks with the members of the House of Assembly in that process. And long, the days here was your meeting are long, but they're here before us and they're here after us to ensure that all runs smoothly. And in addition to this direct staff of Parliament, of course, we have our officers of the Barbados Police Service and other supporting entities, and I want to express my thanks to them. Let me recognize Senator Watson before I conclude my remarks.
Mr. President, thank you. I rise simply to support the comments, the thanks and words of appreciation that have been offered both by the leader of government business and by you, Mr. President. I want to say thank you to my senatorial colleagues also for a very robust and productive debate. In particular, there are some gentlemen who were very entertaining in this corner, but I thank you all. And most definitely, my own observation, just moving about, was the pristine condition of the premises, the civility, the welcoming attitude, the graciousness of all of the staff. And I want to, on behalf of Senator Walters and myself, say thank you to the staff who have supported us, the staff who supported us here in the chamber. And I do also want to wish you a blessed Good Friday and a very happy Easter. Moderation, please, to everyone. And I wish I'm also giving my best wishes and compliments in advance to the clergy among us, knowing what duties they have to fulfill this weekend. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Watson. With that, all remains is for me to thank you all very much for your engagement, for your public service, for your very robust and rigorous examination of the details of the government's program and proposed expenditure and related matters, and to wish all of you a very blessed continuation of the Holy Week, Good Friday, and of course, a very happy Easter. All the very best to you and your families. The question is that the Honourable the Senate be now adjourned sine die. Will all honourable members in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The Senate is now adjourned sine die.